Hello everyone, I am a storyteller, and today I am here to help you relax and accompany you on a night full of mystery. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel to receive more interesting stories. Please tell me where you are from and what time you are watching this video. To relax together, you just need to sit back, get comfortable and listen to the story I will tell. I suddenly woke up in the middle of the night, my heart was pounding. A cold feeling spread throughout my body. A strange sound rang out, sharp, rhythmic tapping sounds hitting the wall as if someone was deliberately conveying a message. It wasn't the sound of something falling, but three clear taps, evenly spaced apart, like a strange music echoing through the quiet room. When I just woke up, my mind still dizzy from incomplete sleep, I felt confused and scared. I'm not a superstitious person, but this feeling is hard to explain. Those knocking sounds are not accidental. It was like some kind of signal, calling me, reminding me to pay attention to something hidden behind that wall. That wall is not an ordinary wall. It's just an arm's length from my bed, and behind that is a dusty storage area where I just dump old, unused furniture. But that night, when that knocking sounded, a strange urge made me face something that I couldn't explain. I decided to respond. With a trembling hand, I tapped the wall 3 times, trying to reproduce the exact rhythm I had just heard. And immediately, the answer came, 3 evenly spaced knocks, like a signal from the other side. A cold current ran through my body. I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe normally, my body felt frozen. I didn't understand what was going on, but the feeling was unforgettable. I turned on the night light, a weak light illuminated the room, but there was nothing but the silence of the night. There is no explanation for those knocking sounds. Even though I checked the storage area during the day, there was no sign of anyone or anything that could have made the sound. The drywall is solid, there are no hidden passages, and there's nothing unusual about it. But that sound still exists in my mind. And every time the night comes, the fear begins to return. Something was wrong, and I felt it deeply. Those tapping sounds are not just a game of the mind. Every night, it becomes stronger, clearer. Something is waiting for me, on the other side of that wall. Do I have enough courage to face it? Can I free myself from this obsession? After the repairman left, I felt my fear had not been relieved. I know what I'm experiencing is not my imagination. That piece of drywall, every single detail, is inexplicable. It felt like something was living behind, pressing against the wall, pushing it out. But I couldn't do anything but suppress that feeling, trying to convince myself that this was just a game of the mind. But then, one night, something truly strange happened. While I was lying in the room, those knocking sounds rang out again. But this time, not 3 hours like usual. It's 5 hours, the rhythm gets faster and faster, sharper. It is no longer a coincidence, but a pattern, a message. I felt my skin numb, unable to move, only able to hear, and feel the coldness from the other side of the wall. I can't bear it anymore. This feeling was so strong, so close, as if something was watching me from behind that drywall. I felt like I was being watched, and the fear was like an inescapable grip. This time, I decided not to let it continue. I stood up, holding the flashlight in shaking hands, then walked to the wall. Every step I took was heavy, as if some invisible force was trying to pull me back. Walking to the storage area, I pulled out all the old furniture, but couldn't find anything. I checked every crevice, every corner, but there was nothing. All is normal. Feelings of emptiness and frustration filled me, but I couldn't escape the strange urge to confront whatever was pushing this wall. Even though my mind said there was nothing there, my heart couldn't believe it. Every night, I was haunted by those knocking sounds, and I began to feel like I was losing my sanity. More and more, I feel like I can't differentiate between reality and illusion. In the following days, I saw shadowy shadows out of the corner of my eye, heard strange sounds echoing from other rooms. There were even times when I felt as if something was moving right under the floor, from room to room. Every time I passed through the hallway, I could feel strange shadows, black flashes in the mirror. One time I even smelled a strong odor, as if something was rotting somewhere in the house. I started to lose sense of time. Endless nights, half-hearted sleeps, feeling extremely tired. I feel like I'm trapped in a nightmare that I can't wake up from. My colleagues also began to notice a change in me. They asked me if something was wrong, but I just avoided it. I can't explain what's happening to me. I just shook my head, trying to hide the overwhelming fear. One evening, when I ran out of patience, I decided to record the sounds I heard. I took my phone, put the recorder on the nightstand and lay down. I hope that if I record something, I can at least prove to myself that I'm not crazy. At first, there was only the hum of the refrigerator and other normal sounds. But after midnight, the knocking began to sound. It is clear, sharp and unmistakable. My breath was choked, sweat poured down my forehead, I didn't dare move, I could only lie down and listen and feel. The tapping sound lasted for several minutes, but it was more than just a tapping sound. I could hear faint clicking and hissing sounds in the background, like there were many sounds overlapping each other, forming a strange and scary chorus. The next day, I played the recording again. The sound was so clear that my hair stood on end. Clicking, hissing sounds, along with an irregular tapping rhythm. I couldn't explain them, and that made me even more confused. Finally, I couldn't keep this fear alone anymore. I found a local repairman and told him about the problem I was having. I said I was concerned about cracks in the walls or some structural problem with the house. He came the next afternoon and did a quick inspection. After checking, he said there was nothing unusual. He didn't find any cracks, no signs of animals or insects. He concluded that it was probably just a feature of the old house. I don't want to become delusional, but the fear inside me cannot go away. This is not a coincidence. Behind that wall, something is waiting, something inexplicable. I didn't have the courage to tell him that those knocks responded like a strange code, that sometimes, the sound seemed strong enough to break through walls. The repairman packed up his tools and left, leaving me with inexplicable confusion. A truth that I don't dare to face, a confusion that makes me unable to find a reasonable explanation. That night, as the witching hour approached, my body was so tense that it seemed unbearable. My breathing was rapid, my chest felt tight like it was being squeezed. I lay in bed, my heart beating so strongly that I felt every beat reverberate through my body. And then, the knocking sounded again, this time clearer and more intense than ever. The banging was so strong that I felt like the wall was being hit from the inside. The whole bed frame shook, as if some force was pushing in from the other side. My eyes were glued to the bulge in the drywall. It seemed bigger, it seemed to be pushing out a little more, rhythmically and steadily, as if the wall had its own heartbeat. My throat was dry, cold sweat ran down my spine, and the tension felt like an invisible hand squeezing my heart. I can't breathe. My hands were shaking, but I decided to stand up. Even though I could hear my heart beating in my ears, I still mustered enough determination to push the nightstand aside, standing close to the wall. I reached out my hand, shaking so much I could feel the vibrations in my elbow as I pressed my palm against the bulge. The surface was cold and unimaginably hard, as if something stronger than ordinary rivets was hidden behind that layer of drywall. The pounding became stronger, in sync with my heartbeat, as if the wall and I were beating in rhythm. I can't escape this feeling. My mind was spinning, I couldn't think clearly, I couldn't tell what was real and what was a dream. Doubts began to creep into my mind, wondering if I was hallucinating from lack of sleep. But every time I wondered, those knocks sounded stronger, mocking my doubts, as if wanting to confirm something I couldn't understand. And then, before those thoughts could subside, I realized that something supernatural, or a very strange phenomenon, was happening right in my own house. It felt cold, like there was an invisible presence standing right behind that wall, as if wanting to penetrate everything. I clearly felt that this was not just a natural phenomenon that I could explain. This is something beyond my understanding. At that moment, all my survival instincts began to scream. I can't stay here any longer. Fear burst inside me, it was unbearable. I rushed out of the bedroom, turning on all the lights in the hallway. My whole body trembled, my body stiffened, as I stood by the door, clutching the key, not knowing what I should do. I didn't know whether to run away into the night outside, or try to stand my ground in the face of something I couldn't explain. My footsteps echoed in the silent house, each step filled with anxiety. With each passing second, the panic grew, covering me like a thick fog. It felt like there was an invisible force forcing me to face something. But I don't know what to do next. I looked towards the window, where weak rays of moonlight shone through the crack, creating strange shadows in the house. The feeling of an indescribable presence, something waiting for me, made me unable to stop, unable to return to the bedroom, and unable to leave this house. I swear I heard crunching footsteps, they followed me from the wall to the living room. The thought that something was hunting me, lurking in my own home, almost made me drop the key. I quickly turned around, trying to be stealthy so as not to make any more noise. My plan at that time was simply to grab a few essentials from the bedroom and drive to a motel, where I could temporarily forget about the nightmare that was gradually taking over my mind. As I approached the hallway, it felt like I was entering a predator's lair. The light was dim, and I had to take every step carefully, because the old floor kept squeaking under every step. I could taste the bitterness in my throat, my mouth was dry, even though my tongue felt swollen. That hallway, long in my imagination, as if each step lasted forever, each moment became eternity. My breathing became ragged and labored as I approached the bedroom door. Inside, the silence was absolute, to the point of being almost unbearable. No knocking, no vibrations. Even the bulge in the wall that I had seen before now looked less obvious. Or maybe my eyes are playing tricks on me, I'm not sure. However, the heaviness in the air remained, as if there was some hidden threat lurking somewhere in this space. I quickly grabbed a few essentials, a handful of clothes, a phone charger, and a few toiletries. I tried to avoid looking at the wall, even though I really wanted to face it, wanting to know if there was still something hiding behind that thin layer of plaster. The nausea from fear made my stomach churn, but I couldn't suppress my curiosity. Finally, I had to glance halfway through, expecting the mortar to separate, or at least a shape to appear. But nothing changed. The wall remained intact, but the feeling of being watched persisted like a sinister presence, lurking right behind. With my heart beating loudly in my chest, I quickly left the house. The glow of the fluorescent lights and the bland decor of the motel made me feel a little bit at ease, at least I was free from the terror in my soul. But even there, I couldn't stop glancing at the walls. The feeling of tension still lingered in my body, refusing to subside, making my hands tremble as I keyed into the motel room and checked the lock 3 times. It was as if I expected to hear those tapping sounds, like a code, echoing on the motel walls, no matter where I was. That evening, I lay on the hard bed with the light on, trying to listen for any noise that might suggest that it had followed me here. The motel was still silent, only the sound of distant traffic echoed through the windows. I tried to console myself in the silence, but memories of the tapping sounds, the persistent rapping, and the unusual vibrations invaded my mind. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the cold plaster in my palm, remembering the vibration I had experienced, as if it were responding to my fear. My sleep was interrupted by constant racing thoughts. By the next morning, I felt torn between fear and a stubborn determination to get my life back. I don't want to sell the house or leave it behind forever. But the idea of returning makes me feel anxious and nauseous. I knew that if I ran away, something would always haunt me from behind that wall, an unresolved nightmare, forever lurking in my mind. I needed a form of closure, an ending, even if that meant facing a presence I couldn't yet understand. I still haven't solved the mystery of those nighttime knocks, but at least I've taken the first step. I admitted to myself that something beyond normal explanation was residing in the space behind that plaster. Whether it could be a manifestation of my own fears or an entity intent on disrupting my reality, I couldn't avoid it any longer. I can't be sure about what's going on. All I know is that it's waiting in the dark, watching me, calling to me through strangely coded touches. Every night, the fear returns, but a little determination is not lacking either. I was standing on the threshold of something inexplicable, incomprehensible, and I was aware that my next action might determine my relationship with this invisible force. My only hope is that I can last longer, that my faith will remain steadfast, while the wall still stands, and if it can be overcome, if I have to face whatever is lurking behind the plaster, I only pray that I will be ready to confront what reason refuses. Even if I could escape, part of me doubted that I would actually leave it behind. It has found me, and part of me is afraid that it will always be there, clinging to me forever. And then I came home that night, even though I couldn't explain why I came back. My chest tightened as if something was weighing me down, and the air around me seemed electrically charged, uncomfortably heavy. There was no wind, no sound of traffic in the distance, only the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. As I unlocked the front door and walked in, my heart pounded again, for reasons I still don't understand. Immediately, I felt something was wrong in the house. The living room became darker, the light seemed to be sucked away in my brief absence. My breathing became rapid, a feeling of discomfort overwhelmed me as I realized that I was no longer alone in this house. At that moment, I turned back to look towards the window and saw a strange sign. It was shaped like a human hand pressing against the glass from the inside, facing me. But the color of that fingerprint is completely wrong. It was a dull, gray color, looking more like a stain from some foul substance than a typical fingerprint. I hesitated, not sure I was seeing correctly. But my hand still reached out, touched the glass, and immediately, I was startled as if I had been burned. It was so cold it was almost cold enough to remind me of damp soil and cemetery stones in the middle of winter. My heart shook strongly, I felt sweat prickling on my temples, but in that moment, I couldn't move. My legs felt rooted to the floor. The shape of the hand appears clear and unstable. The palm is large, the fingers are strangely long and delicate, but full of concern. I could see faint streaks, as if flesh itself had pressed against the glass in grotesque detail. I glanced around the room, the dim light was just enough to see the things I had left behind before I left. There was no one in the dark corner, the living room was still empty. My instincts told me I should check the locks, double-check all the doors to make sure no intruders were inside. But I just stood there, motionless, with that single impression on the glass. Finally, I forced myself to breathe, trying to convince myself that it was just a weird joke, or simply an inexplicable stain. I grabbed a rag from the kitchen and went back to cleaning the windows. The initial stain left a faint gray mark, but then it disappeared under the cloth I rubbed until no trace remained. My heart rate began to slow, even though my hand was still shaking around the rag. I double-check all the locks in the house, make sure every window is closed, every safety latch is carefully checked. As I crawled into bed, I convinced myself that it was all a weird joke or a strange, inexplicable stain. But in my heart, the anxiety and fear still lingered, like a ghost that couldn't leave. I couldn't sleep without imagining that wet presence, as if it were pressing against my window, waiting for me in the dark. That feeling couldn't be shaken off. Even when I tried to sleep, I could still feel a strange tension rising in my body, as if something was staring at me from the outside. The next morning, I woke up with a slight headache, not because of being drunk or tired but because of an indescribable feeling, a tension that had not been relieved. Part of me felt relieved as the sunlight filtered through the curtains, illuminating the living room and making it seem more welcoming, but as soon as I passed that window, I felt a shiver run down my spine. That sign has returned. But this time, it's not quite the same as before. The handprint I saw yesterday was now tilted at a different angle, as if it had moved during the night. The fingers, slightly longer, produced faint scratches near the fingertips. I stood there, unable to take my eyes off the mark, and I felt its presence as clearly as if it were there, right before my eyes. I tried to look closely at the glass, hoping to confirm what I was seeing. Yes, as I thought, there were small lines etched into the surface of the glass, so small that they could almost be cracks, or perhaps the glass had been scraped. But no matter what, the creepy feeling still couldn't leave me. That coldness seemed to spread throughout my body. I decided to clean it again, using more force, but this time, the impression only faded a little after I pressed too hard. A feeling of anxiety grew inside me, as I worried that I had dulled the pain, causing that presence to temporarily disappear, but not disappear. As I stepped back, my breathing became rapid, my skin cold. I felt watched, as if something was waiting just outside my vision. Every time I turned my head, I expected to see a silhouette, some floating shape, but there was nothing. An inexplicable feeling of paranoia crept itself into my thoughts, whispering that the hand was more than a simple sign. I felt foolish even thinking about the possibility that something supernatural might be happening. However, I couldn't deny the lingering chill in the air, the feeling of being gripped by fear that I couldn't explain. That night, I went home an hour earlier than usual, determined not to let anyone sneak in without my knowledge. I checked around the house, behind the bushes along the fence, and even indirectly asked the neighbors if they had noticed anything strange. But there was nothing, no sign of any intrusion into my house. Even so, fear still did not let me go. That feeling couldn't be turned off. With every step there was an exaggerated attention, as if I always felt the presence of something behind, something watching me. The house seemed normal, but I felt like I was trapped in an inexplicable space. I checked all the doors and windows, making sure they were locked tight. But even though I convinced myself that there was nothing here but stains on the window, the tension in my body still couldn't be erased. That strange presence, even though I could temporarily forget it for a moment, still clung to me like a ghost that would never leave. They said they didn't find anything strange, but something in their tone made me feel suspicious. My question seemed strange to them, but the silence and hesitation in answering said something. I can't blame them, because I myself am confused. Feeling tense, clammy palms and heart pounding uncontrollably in my chest. I couldn't stop thinking about the image of a pale, patient figure pressing his hand against my window, over and over again. I told myself that there must be a reasonable explanation for all of this. But as night fell, all my attention was drawn to strange details, and although I carefully checked all the windows and locked them carefully, the feeling of discomfort did not leave me. The shadows in the living room seemed to move when I wasn't looking, and the overhead light flickered once or twice, making me even more nervous. My mouth was dry, and I tried to remain calm, but anxiety was slowly engulfing me. Then I heard a light tapping sound, or maybe something close to it. My heart sank. I got up to check, but when I entered the living room, there was nothing but thick silence. But when I returned to the sofa, I realized that the handprint was back, almost taunting me from the same place yesterday. This time, the mark was darker, clearer, and the scratches from the fingertips appeared clearly on the surface of the glass, as if they were emphasizing that presence, emphasizing that it was still here, right before my eyes. My body trembled as if flooded with a cold wave of fear that crashed down my spine, making it almost impossible to breathe. My heart was beating so hard I thought it might burst. I pressed my hand against my chest, reminding myself to slow my breathing, but my gaze remained fixed on that elongated shape. The palm on the glass seems hostile and invasive. It was like a mark of something that had taken possession of my house, a sign that that presence was taking over every space in the house. My skin got goosebumps when I saw it. This is not a simple joke. I felt that something was testing the boundary between the world outside and inside the house, leaving strange traces as a warning, or maybe an invitation, that I couldn't refuse. That was the moment I decided. At that moment, I knew that I had to defend this house like a fortress. I can't let this continue to rule my life. I installed extra locks on every window, and even bought special reinforcement bars for the sliding windows to make sure nothing could get in. I also bought a thick opaque cloth to completely cover the living room window, hoping to block any possibility of seeing that terrible mark. The idea is simple: if I can't see it, then perhaps it loses its power over me. I hope that by blocking all these signs, I can be free from fear. But deep down, I know that nothing can erase the feeling of existence, that something out there is still waiting, watching, and I can't hide forever. Yet, deep down inside me, there was a suspicion that such a simple measure, just blocking the view, couldn't really matter. The intrusive feeling of evil aura that came with those handprints wouldn't go away just because I covered the windows. Still, I did so, convincing myself that I could at least temporarily stop seeing them, knowing that wasn't the case. That night, the living room was plunged into oppressive darkness. The heavy fabric on the window makes the space feel more stuffy than ever. The only light I allowed was a dim lamp, just enough to create shadows without illuminating anything. Everything around seemed to be swallowed in silence. My breath echoed, breaking the stillness, and every little noise from the pipe creaking on the floorboard subsided like a slap to my nerves. My heart rate refused to stabilize, seemingly being pushed to an uncomfortable level. My mind conjured up the image of that hand again, pressing against the fabric from the outside, dragging unnatural fingers across the surface. Suddenly, I thought I heard faint creaking sounds. But every time I stopped to listen more carefully, the sound stopped. I can't sleep. Fear overcame all attempts at relaxation. I lay awake in bed, the sheets soaked with sweat, my body refusing to cool down and my pulse pounding in my temples. I was caught between wanting to rush out to the living room and check the window, or just bury myself deeper under the covers to forget the feeling. In the end, fear won. I lay there, unable to sleep, just waiting for dawn to come. The nightmare continued to torment me in a fitful sleep, without a second of peace. When morning finally came, I forced myself out of the house to do my usual chores, hoping the daylight would clear my head. However, when I returned home in the early afternoon, I felt something unusual. The window covering had been disturbed. It is slightly curled and has a slight tear on one edge. My pulse immediately spiked, my body tensed. I pulled the cloth aside and saw the glass behind it, fresh scratches. The outline of the fingerprint was gone, but the glass was now covered in cobwebs with lines scratched by something or someone. A terrifying electric shock coursed through my limbs, my mouth went dry and I felt the distinct sensation of panic lingering on the back of my tongue. I tried to rationalize what I was seeing, but my mind refused to comply. That feeling of existence, the invisible presence, returned, 10 times stronger than before, making the hairs on my arms stand on end. Every breath I took felt like shards of ice entering my lungs. I kept glancing around the corners of the room, certain I would catch a glimpse of some movement, some shape I couldn't name, but there was nothing. My paranoia increased, to the point of near exhaustion. I feel like I'm losing control. Desperate for some sense of control, I decided to meticulously document everything. I took pictures of the scratches, although they were faint and difficult to photograph. I even recorded audio in my living room overnight, hoping to pick up any strange sounds. But when I played it all back, I heard a slight noise that rose and fell at irregular intervals, like distorted, heavy breathing. That alone is enough to give me goosebumps. It was not the sound of any physical object, but something inexplicable, like a formless breath. In an effort to regain my sanity, I decided to rearrange the furniture to create a clear view of the window from anywhere in the living room. Every step is a reminder that I cannot continue to live in fear. I did everything I could to flood the house with light, pulling curtains everywhere, trying to push back the darkness that seemed to cling to me. But despite all my efforts, nothing could help me feel secure. Every time I hear even the slightest noise, my heart clenches in my chest. My throat felt tight, sweat began to flow a cold path down my spine, and I clearly felt that tension spreading in every cell. The nights were terrible. Every creak on the floor turned into a step, every rustle of the wind outside became a sinister presence, as if someone was examining every wall in the house. My reflection in the hallway mirror also startled me so much that I almost screamed. The line between what was real and what was just a product of my frayed nerves gradually blurred. I began to wonder if I was losing control of my own perceptions. Maybe I'm imagining this whole nightmare from some deep well of anxiety in my mind. But then I remembered the wet texture of that first fingerprint. My fingertips had retreated from the glass, and the cold, haunting feeling was still fresh in my mind. One evening I was so full of restless energy that I couldn't sit still. I paced back and forth in the living room, feeling like I couldn't stop. The light was still dim, and even though I tried to block every corner, the feeling that someone was always watching me couldn't escape. While passing by the window, I saw the cloth covering the window shaking. At first, I thought it was because the air conditioner was on, causing the air in the room to fluctuate. But as soon as I turned off the air conditioner, the fabric continued to vibrate strangely, as if something from the outside was impacting it. I stood still, my eyes glued to that cloth. The tension grew more and more, and I began to feel like I was being watched from the outside, from the shadow hidden behind that thick layer of fabric. The noises became more and more distinct, as if someone was walking closer. The fabric kept shaking while the air around me seemed to become heavier, more oppressive. Unable to bear it any longer, I decided to pull the cloth off. My eyes widened when I saw the scene before me. Behind the fabric, the window glass shows deep scratches, long streaks as if someone had just scratched it. And the fingerprints remained, faint, but enough for me to feel a presence that I couldn't explain. It's still there, as if reminding me that I can't escape what started that first night. I felt my body paralyzed, unable to move. The cold feeling from the glass spread into my body like a wave. My mouth was dry and I couldn't speak. I know I can't continue living in this fear, but I don't know how to get out. I started checking everything, making sure there was no one outside the window, but every time I did, I felt that feeling, the surveillance, more and more clearly. The fabric vibrated gently but persistently, as if someone's fingertips were rubbing the outside of the window. My stomach turned, and a wave of nausea rose as the adrenaline rushed through my body, making every muscle tighten. I approached the window, each step slowly, my hands shaking so much that I had to press them into fists to maintain some semblance of control. When I finally stood a few inches away from the canvas, I could almost feel the movement behind the glass. My scalp tingled and I could feel the blood rushing through my veins. Time seemed to slow down, and I felt my heartbeat echo like thunder in my head. Without warning, a sharp crack tore through the silence, and the entire window frame shook, as if the giant string of some terrifying instrument had been struck. I staggered backwards, almost losing my balance. The presence on the other side was testing the barrier more strongly this time, leaving me with the undeniable impression that it had become bolder. My response was to reinforce the window with layers of wood, tape, and anything else that would block the entrance. The living room now resembles a sealed tomb, a place filled with tension and confusion. Every day, the darkness in that room seemed thicker, as if it were a living creature feeding on my terror. My thoughts became more frantic. My reflection in the hallway mirror looked gaunt, my eyes sunken. I cannot concentrate on work or in any conversation. My mind always returned to that window, to the presence my hand had just touched. I refused to stay in the living room after dark, arranged a temporary sleeping place in the bedroom, and locked the door 3 times behind me. But I could still hear faint but persistent noises, tapping sounds, which sometimes sounded like raspy, desperate breathing. My heart pounded until my vision blurred, and I often found myself on the verge of hyperventilating, struggling to breathe normally as time passed into the night. One night, as exhaustion lulled me into a fitful sleep, a clap of thunder on the living room window jolted me awake. My lungs felt as if I had plunged into icy water. I know I have to deal with this. Lying in bed, cowering, will not end this situation. Summoning the last bit of courage, I walked out into the hallway, each step heavy with fear. When I reached the living room, a series of sharp cracks sounded, as if something was hitting the glass with an unnatural force. My skin flared with a primal aura of terror. I stared at the reinforced window, and realized that the fabric had been torn in places, revealing the glimmer of smashed glass underneath. The shape of the handprint there is more twisted than ever. The fingers were unnaturally long, each tip ending in deep scratches, etching a pain that I couldn't shake off. My vision seemed to blur in that moment. For a moment, I thought I saw movement behind the hand, a slight shift, a shadow breaking through the thin veil of darkness. My gut twisted and I realized that somehow the window's boundaries were no longer certain. There was a feeling that the space beyond the glass did not line up with my familiar backyard or the outside world as I knew it. It is like a void, another plane on which this presence stretches. My mind was spinning and I wondered if I was going crazy. Is this really happening, or have I created a nightmare so elaborate that I can no longer distinguish it from reality? My eyes burned from lack of sleep, and my whole body trembled with fear, as if everything was slowly sinking into an abyss with no escape. However, I took a step closer to the window and felt a strong urge to face it, to face the shadow that had been clinging to me all this time. The cracks in the glass pulsed in the dim light, as if they were blood vessels, straining under the weight of fear. The handprint now resembled a claw, each finger tensed, as if they were ready to reach out to threaten me. A cold feeling ran down my spine as I looked at it. My breathing began to accelerate, so strong that it drowned out all other sounds except my own breathing. My heart pounded loudly in my chest, the sound like a warning bell, reminding me of the presence I was trying to avoid. Something inside me, some deep instinct, told me to act. I grabbed a heavy curtain rod and slammed it against the glass, expecting that the window would shatter and sharp shards of glass would fly out. But instead of the shattering of glass, there was only a hollow noise, as if I had struck empty space. And when I looked at it, I saw the hand, that handprint, thrown away as if knocked off the glass, and then I saw myself blurring, losing clarity in that moment. In the blink of an eye, everything was silent, so quiet that I couldn't breathe for a few seconds. That feeling, extreme fear, as if I had entered another world where nothing really existed. I started waiting for the next movement, the next crack in the glass, but nothing happened. My body was shaking uncontrollably. I had to lean against the wall to keep my balance. The adrenaline coursing through my veins made me gasp, but I couldn't understand what I was feeling. "Ain't scratches," I said silently to myself, as if searching for a reasonable explanation for all that was going on. But the presence behind that wall, behind the glass, remained silent, even though I knew it was still looking at me, waiting for the right moment to approach. Part of me wanted to believe that it was all just a product of stress, but there was no denying that something was real, a haunting that I couldn't shake. I can't sleep. Every night, I heard the echo of the shiver in my mind, as if the noise was still going on, no matter how hard I tried to convince myself that it was just a trick of my mind. Sometimes, I start to find myself wondering if I really am living in a nightmare, or if all of this is real. But when I heard that sound, that feeling, I knew that part of me couldn't deny its existence, couldn't deny the feeling that something was there, waiting. Even my own reflection in the blurred and distorted glass made my nerves fray. I don't know if I'll ever truly feel safe here again. Occasionally, I felt a cold wind blowing through the house, even though all the windows and doors were tightly closed, but my reason could not explain it. My instincts knew that there was something lurking just beyond that fragile barrier. Perhaps it is waiting for a sign of weakness. Or perhaps, it's content to let me torture myself for the time being. All I know is that every night, as I lie awake in the suffocating silence, I can feel that presence. In my eyes I saw the shape of that terrible hand, the long, slender fingers that the glass was pressing forward, as if to test the division between the two worlds. And I can't find an explanation for that. Every night, that feeling returns, like an insurmountable challenge. I entered that building. The atmosphere felt different at night. It was heavy, almost greasy, as if it was clinging to my skin and into my lungs. The lights in the hallway flickered unpredictably, violently each time I pressed the button for the elevator and watched the jammed metal doors slide open. Upon entering, I just knew that as soon as I reached the basement, my entire body was tense as if I anticipated something lurking in the dark corners of the building. My building is old, probably built decades ago, with frozen cars, just occasional strange noises. That's usually the only time I can get my laundry done without having to wait in a long line. However, I noticed him, the man I always saw every time I went down to the basement. He was always there, in his room, just looking straight ahead, sometimes his eyes turned towards me. I felt my shoulders tense and cold sweat break out on my body. Every time I saw him, I felt a vague sense of anxiety, but I couldn't say what made me so afraid. The basement was unsettlingly dark, but each subsequent trip to the laundry room proved that it was more than just a trick of the light. One particularly long night, I gathered my laundry around 10 p.m. and headed downstairs. I am very heavy, every step is careful. As I tiptoed down the hallway, I hoped he wouldn't be there, but I knew he always would be. He stood near the dryer, seemingly waiting for his clothes to be finished. When I walked in, I immediately felt his eyes lock on me. A surge of adrenaline caused me to stumble and step back. His damp clothes hung nearby, and I just lowered my head, focusing on the small squares of cracked tiles beneath my feet. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed drops of water falling. At first I assumed it was just water, but something about their color gave me pause. The water drops fell slowly, there was something strange about the way they fell from the fabric. My stomach twisted like it was being clenched, my throat was as dry as sand. Every part of my body urged me to leave, but I couldn't move, I was frozen in place, haunted by a mixture of curiosity and terror. Suddenly, I heard him speak in a low urgent tone, asking if I saw something. His face was pale, drawing a strange, indescribable shape. Although I couldn't be sure, I sensed that he believed there was something lurking there, clinging to him. The entire room seemed to shrink, as if the walls were pressing in on the overhead light. I couldn't do it, I couldn't leave that space. The feeling of fear and confusion made me almost exhausted, as if space and time were weighing me down, just waiting to swallow everything. I can't get a full breath. Feeling claustrophobic, I hurried down the hallway, the old air of the hallway closing in around me. The overhead light seemed to dim with every step I took, and as I approached the elevator, I heard something. I turned to press the button for the floor, and then I saw him again. He stood there, leaning back as if something was pulling his chin toward the ceiling, and I felt a wave of coldness. The elevator door was closed, but I couldn't walk anymore, the feeling of that presence seemed to follow me. Daylight, no matter how bright, still cannot dispel the feeling of heaviness and tension. Even though I didn't see him often, every time I walked down the basement hallway I felt an inescapable flow, as if he was always there, waiting. The nights became more restless than ever. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart gasping for air. I dreamed of a laundry room with flickering lights and dark liquid dripping from my nightmares. I found myself locking the door, checking everything, looking through the peephole every time I heard the slightest noise in the hallway. And then, one afternoon, I overheard a neighbor mention something, as if he was trying to ease the growing anxiety in my mind. As the day progressed, I found myself needing to do laundry at an inconvenient time. It was too much for me, and I couldn't go. The elevator made me feel a surge of claustrophobia wash over me, the surrounding walls felt like they were too close, the lights dimmed and the ride became too long. When the doors opened to the basement, cold air greeted me. Each footstep echoed strangely, and I couldn't escape the strange feeling that I was being watched from behind the washers and dryers. I decided to wait there, instead of leaving my clothes unattended, leaning against the vibrating washing machine. I try to occupy my mind by scrolling through the minutes on my phone, but the stress lingers. My body remained tense, and fear sneaked up again. Suddenly, I noticed the figure of the man on the second floor, standing there, with his head tilted strangely, as if he was trying to avoid an invisible attacker. His every step echoed in the hallway, making it impossible for me to leave. His gaze locked on me, and a panic surged through me, making every nerve in my body tense. A feeling of extreme fear gripped me, making me unable to move. I could only stand there, looking at him. His lips moved, but I couldn't hear his words. However, I sensed that something was wrong, and as he took another step in, the overhead light suddenly went out, as if everything in that space had been buried in darkness. A strong feeling of fear rose inside me, like an internal scream, telling me to get off my laundry and run immediately. Without hesitation, I rushed into the exit, brushing past him, but then I felt something wet and metallic as my entire body convulsed in the hallway. I stumbled, and something pulled me back, my breathing quickened, my heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst in my chest. The only thought in my mind at that time was to put as much distance between myself and the basement. When I finally got inside my apartment, I locked the door, latched the chain, and slid the deadbolt into place. I pressed my back against the door, trying to steady my breathing, but that night, the last night I went anywhere near the laundry room, I knew I couldn't take it anymore. Wandering through the darkness, whispering in a language I couldn't understand, my sense of security was replaced. A constant worry gnawed at my nerves, making it impossible for me to calm down. Finally, I decided that I could no longer endure this silent fear. I confronted the building's manager one morning, in broad daylight, quietly explaining that something was wrong, a feeling that was indefinable, but strong enough to make me unable to trust anything. I couldn't deny the lingering feeling that there was something fundamentally wrong in that building, but there was nothing I could do but live with it. Even so, I still felt a presence in the hallway every time the light flickered. I heard the noises of old machines. I've thought about moving, but I'm still stuck in a cycle of curiosity, fear, and fatigue. I did my laundry in the afternoon, in the presence of sunlight, or at least with neighbors around. But every time I had to go through the basement door at night, a snake-like feeling coiled around me as I looked out, remembering the dark drops on his shirt and the question he asked me about the darkness behind me. I always answered him, both to him and to myself, but I wondered if I really saw him in the laundry room, because those shadows weren't just behind him. They filled the space, lighting up the strange sounds of the washing machine, echoing in my thoughts. The cold feeling reminded me that sometimes the things we don't see are the things that pursue us. The room's stench seemed to thicken immediately when I stepped inside, as if the walls let out a faint breath as soon as I turned on the light. My sweat soaked the back of my neck. The door was always slightly ajar, but somehow never opened more than a hand's width. I stood there, quietly in tension, like a silent sentinel in the dark night. Again, I remembered the annoyance of not being able to leave this apartment, wondering why someone would break their lease suddenly, but the rent was low and the apartment, though old, looked pretty solid. When I solved the problem, I focused again on the closet in my bedroom. In the past, every apartment I've lived in had a standard closet with a door that opened freely, but here, the door stuck, refusing to open more than a few inches, no matter how hard I pulled. A strange feeling rose inside me, as if there was an invisible resistance. I even felt a gentle exhalation from inside, like someone breathing through clenched teeth. Every time I tried to open the door, chills ran down my spine, but I couldn't explain the feeling. Finally, I decided to check, and with flashlight in hand, trembling, I approached. I peered into the darkness inside the closet, seeing only dusty shelves or the faint outlines of old clothes. But the strange feeling did not leave. I stood there, even hearing a small noise. At this point, I couldn't be sure what I saw, but the dim light from the bedroom reflecting off the wall made me feel like there was something in that space. Suddenly, I saw a silhouette, a faint shadow, as if it was moving gently. I almost doubted myself, but then I realized that it was moving in my direction, from inside the closet. My heart pounded, and my breathing became shallow. I tried telling myself that nothing happened, it was just my imagination. But a stronger feeling took over me, and I couldn't stop. I stood still, then asked in a whisper, almost trembling, "Is anyone there?" My words couldn't be heard clearly, they were faint like a whisper in the wind, but I felt that something was changing. The light gradually became dimmer, and suddenly, a loud sound rang out, a cold voice from the darkness, "Silence." The air in that hidden chamber seemed compressed, as if it was squeezing every ounce of life out of me. My temples throbbed, and beads of cold sweat ran down the back of my neck. Then there was a certain shape that forced me to balance all the nerves in my body. Every muscle in my body screamed to run away, but I forced myself to stay, long enough to shine the flashlight again. Thoughts spiraled in my head, wondering if I was experiencing hallucinations or if a real presence was occupying that chamber. The smell of rot and dampness became too much to bear, causing me to cover my mouth with my hand to keep from screaming. Finally, everything broke loose, and I gave myself over to an uncontrollable panic. I couldn't do anything but tremble, my body was drenched in sweat, my palms were cold as I realized that I was no longer myself. I looked in the bathroom mirror and saw a gaunt image of myself, my eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. I almost didn't recognize myself anymore as I splashed cold water on my face, clutching the edge of the sink. At this moment, I realized I was shaking from head to toe, feeling like there was something hiding behind the walls, watching me. My heart was beating so hard that I could hear my own beating in my ears. I finally fell asleep, but my dreams were disturbing, full of incomprehensible symbols and blurred images. A small part of me wondered if I should seek professional help, but another part was stubborn, feeling that I had to face this on my own. If something really exists in that hidden chamber, I need to understand better, face it again. However, one night I discovered thin scratches on the wooden floor near my closet, as if something had tried to pull it off while I slept. My nights were punctuated by the fleeting sounds of chain links and murmurs just outside my bedroom. Each time, I tried to push the heaviest furniture into the corner of the room, hoping that would prevent anything from getting near me. However, every time I did so, the sound of the hammer hitting objects made my heart rate increase. My mind raced with the possibility that maybe something on the other side was listening. My clothes were soaked in sweat, and my shoulders were so tense that I hoped I could do something to get out of this situation. But the room remained silent, without any signs of change. I drifted into a tense sleep, feeling like a hammer was hitting my chest hard. For the first time, I found myself trapped behind the improvised seals I had created, unable to escape the overwhelming fear. I no longer hear the rustle of chains or that whisper of pain. Although I still felt an underlying discomfort, I had a few good nights of sleep the past few nights. But that calm didn't last long. About a week after I had secured the door, I woke up late one night, and instant alertness overtook me. Every hair on my body stood up, my skin suddenly chilled. My heart pounded in my throat, and as soon as I realized it, the room was filled with a faint, but unmistakable smell of rotting wood, which I had come to loathe. My mind raced, trying to figure out the reason for this anomaly, but I knew that something was seeping through the cracks in the wall. I listened. Sweat pooled at my temples, and a slight scratching sound on the other side of the wall turned my stomach. The sound sounded like a nail hitting wood. It was almost tentative, running the length of the closet. My breath caught in my throat, it felt as if someone or something was running their fingers along the exact spot where I had nailed it. I froze, as my weak barrier was not enough to stop whatever might be waiting behind the wall. It took me a while to realize that the chain sound had returned heavier and more purposeful this time. A fear welled up inside me. The wardrobe door is no longer just an inanimate frame. It felt alive, as if there was a menacing energy trying to disrupt the quiet. I jumped out of bed, my heart pounding in my ears, my body tense with fear. Something inside urged me to open the front door and run out, but I couldn't bring myself to move. I trembled from head to toe, gripped by the fear that the slightest noise from me would agitate whatever was lurking behind that wall. The scratching continued methodically, on the wood, pausing and then continuing, as if something was testing my limits. The damp stench still clung to my throat, making me nauseous, but I still stood rooted to the spot, my eyes glued to that corner of the room, where the feeling of presence became more and more evident. I couldn't move, couldn't react. There was only the steady scratching sound, each beat like a call, inviting me closer to the encounter. When the last light of dawn crept through the thin curtains, the scratches subsided, but the feeling inside me was not completely gone. My body felt exhausted, as if I had gone through a long battle, lasting for hours. I realized that I couldn't endure another night like that. I couldn't live in this extreme anxiety. I needed to do something, to face something I couldn't explain. The suitcase was tightly packed, and I decided to move without any explanation. I don't care about losing my deposit or the inconvenience of having to find a new place to live. I just knew I couldn't spend another minute haunted by that door. Before leaving, I walked closer to the closet one last time, my pulse pounding with fear. The barrier was still intact, although the nails were bent, looking as if they had been pushed from the other side. The door was broken into pieces, hairline cracks radiating through the wood. A wave of nausea rolled over me. Whatever was inside managed to escape almost successfully. Without a second thought, I grabbed a permanent marker and wrote a single warning on the wall above the closet frame: "Don't open it." My hands were shaking so much that the letters were almost impossible to read. Then I ran away, slamming the front door behind me. I drove away with a knot in my stomach, cold sweat clinging to my skin. That feeling, the feeling of being watched, still doesn't let me go. Hours later, when I checked into a hotel miles away, I still couldn't shake that feeling. The feeling that something is still watching me. My reflection in the bathroom mirror looked blank, my eyes darting to any dark corner, half expecting to see a figure crouched there. Even now, I cannot explain what I saw in that cramped space. No way. All I know is that my hands still tremble as I think about that distorted figure, and the creaking sound of the chains. That memory stuck with me, the nagging fear that I had locked something truly sinister in that closet, but perhaps it wasn't fully contained yet. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I wake up startled, my heart pounding as I hear whispers echoing in my new home. Those whispers were inexplicable, but they continued, a reminder that something was never completely closed, and no matter where I fled, that presence would follow me. I couldn't be sure whether those feelings were real or just terrifying ghosts of myself. What I know is that I will never open a closet door without feeling a little panicked. And I will always wonder if I left something still lingering in those hidden shadows, waiting for someone else to discover its secrets. This thought sent a new wave of fear through my veins, and I realized that my nightmares may never truly end. That silent, distorted presence is imprinted on my mind, and I suspect it may remain there, whispering from the dark corners of my memory, for the rest of my life. One day, when I walked up to the attic, I felt something change in the air. Dust floated in the dim light, as if this space had suddenly become an observer of me, following my every move. The smell of old wood and damp insulation filled the air, but there was an underlying acidity that almost made me taste the rust on my tongue. My heart was pounding, not from the effort of climbing the creaky ladder but from an unshakable feeling that I was intruding on a place that naturally preferred quiet. The narrow beam of the flashlight shines into the dark corners, revealing cobwebs covering clusters and stacks of boxes in various stages of decay. I remember thinking at that moment that darkness is not simply a lack of light. It felt alive, almost as if the shadows were breathing, as if there was something in there watching me, following me. That's how my challenge started. An ominous greeting from the darkness of an attic where secrets need to be hidden. I've been renovating my newly purchased house for a few weeks, focusing on the practical work, fixing the roof, checking for leaks, reinforcing old beams. Finally, the attic needs attention. I was expecting a messy but smooth job, to clean up the trash patches, to make sure there wasn't any structural damage. But I never imagined that I would discover a small wooden chest, hidden behind a fake wall. The chest was locked, but age had weakened the hinges. With a strong screwdriver, it cracked. Inside were dusty documents, yellowed pages tied with brittle ribbons and a single folded letter placed on top. This letter, addressed to any prospective residents, immediately piqued my curiosity. The letter was short, and the handwriting was shaky and uneven, as if the person who wrote it could barely hold the pen steady. Contents of the warning letter. Do not open the way to what lies between the walls. Once released, it becomes stronger. It feeds on your breath, your thoughts, your fears. My pulse quickened and goosebumps spread across my arms. At first I thought it was just an old superstition, or maybe some local legend, the product of a solitary imagination. But an inexplicable feeling of anxiety welled up inside me, as if this letter actually had power, a power I couldn't ignore. However, it cannot be denied that the message in that letter made me feel uneasy. It evokes an urgent tone, almost vibrating off the page. It's the kind of note that makes readers think twice about delving deeper into forgotten secrets. After reading through old documents, mostly receipts from decades ago and letters describing normal family concerns, I discovered a diagram. It depicted the attic from a familiar location that I recognized. But there was a new detail I hadn't seen before, a small square drawn in the far corner, labeled "Trapdoor." Unable to resist my curiosity, I decided to follow the diagram. The flashlight beam danced across the rotting wooden panels as I moved through piles of old furniture. Under a large pile of dusty boxes, I found the trapdoor. I felt an unreasonable thrill, or perhaps a grim curiosity as I started moving the boxes aside. The trapdoor is built flush with the floor, the edges are lined with ornate patterns on the wood. There is a cast iron ring for the handle, locked in place with an old-fashioned latch. The air around it smelled of stale air, and I smelled chemicals, a strong, unpleasant smell. Without thinking much, I used a small crowbar to pry the latch. The moment the latch popped open, a cold wind blew out from the hatch. It was so sudden and powerful that it knocked over nearby boxes, papers and old clothes scattered everywhere. I stumbled backwards, my flashlight flickering, and in the swirl of dust, I heard something. It might have been laughter, but it was muffled, as if coming from thick layers of insulation. I stood there, a cold feeling engulfing me. The surrounding space suddenly became heavier, as if a presence was watching me from behind. Even though I couldn't see clearly, I could feel something waiting, hiding in the darkness, waiting for me to open it. That feeling, that intense tension, undeniably awakened something in me. That sound was not a noise in my ears, but more like a vibration in my chest, spreading strangely. Terror shot through me like an electric current, making my hands shake as I tried to close the trap door. I pressed my weight against it, trying to keep the strange wind calm. But in the silence that followed, I could hear the strong beat of my heart in my temples. The cold I felt didn't just come from the air, but was deeper, penetrating my skin as if I had stepped into icy water. From that night on, nothing was the same. At first, only when I went to sleep and sank into the mattress did I feel a light breeze brush my neck, accompanied by a distant whisper. Maybe it was my imagination, but it was so obvious I couldn't ignore it. My nights quickly turned into a cycle of fitful sleep and jarring awakenings. In the morning, I woke up with my body drenched in sweat, the bed sheet wrapped around me like a cocoon. My dreams, though I can't recall the details, always involved the attic and the feeling that someone, or something, was trying to coax me back there. I felt my name being called softly, caught in the vortex of cold air I had felt when I opened that hatch. Even remembering these moments of the night now makes the hairs on my arms stand up. That feeling, that presence, doesn't seem to leave me. I began to lose track of time, unable to clearly distinguish between day and night. Routine tasks at work feel distant, unimportant. My colleagues began to notice my pale and hollow skin, asking if I was sick, but I only vaguely replied that it was stress from the house renovation. But inside me, I knew that the real source of all these changes was not work, but something that had changed in my house, and it had to do with that secret passage. My anxiety peaks every time I hear an unusual sound in the wall, like a low scratching sound or a low humming sound. The rational part of my mind insisted these noises were just old pipes or small animals. But I couldn't let go of the memory of that letter and the sinister aura I had felt. Every time I tried to dismiss supernatural explanations, the memory of that fleeting laugh drowned out my disbelief, leaving me unable to break out of that spiral of fear. One day, I asked a contractor to check the structure of the attic. He reassured me that the rafters were stable, but I noticed he was uncomfortable up there. He complained of a sudden chill and a strange wind that made his hair stand on end. He didn't say much, just advised me to keep the attic well ventilated to avoid mold. After he left, I felt both relieved and worried. Relieved that I wasn't the only one feeling the strange cold, but worried because it confirmed that something unnatural was happening. With each passing day, the house no longer resembles a sanctuary. The walls seemed to pulse with a hidden heartbeat, and I could have sworn that the darkness in the corners was darker than before. It felt as if the house was gradually coming to life. It was no longer just a place for me to stay but had become an inevitable space, something uncontrollable. A few evenings later, as I was sitting in the living room, trying to distract myself with a book, a sudden gust of wind shook the front window. I felt compelled to look upstairs. My eyes turned toward the attic door. My breath caught in my throat, and a tingling sensation spread across the back of my neck. The airflow in the room seems targeted, not random. It was as if the air itself wanted to push me towards the attic. Against my better judgment, I grabbed a flashlight and advanced. My footsteps on the stairs sounded unusually loud, each step causing a dull vibration that echoed throughout the wooden frame of the house. My mouth was dry, and the closer I got to the attic, the more pronounced the dryness became, as if every bit of moisture was being stripped from my body by the air around me. I could feel my heart beating so hard that it seemed to vibrate in every fiber of my being. When I opened the attic door, my heart beat so hard I could feel it in my gums. The door opened gently, but the space inside was like a dark abyss, like somewhere forgotten. A musty, cold, and sad smell filled the air. The room before my eyes, although there was nothing clear, gave me the feeling of being observed from somewhere. I couldn't understand why there was a presence in this space, but I clearly felt that I was not alone. The feeling of something waiting, watching, impossible to ignore. Darkness swallowed the cramped space, except for the circle of blinding light from my flashlight. All the boxes I had rearranged were still where I had left them, and the trap door in the corner was still closed. But I felt an invisible presence pressing on my awareness. I heard a faint wheezing sound, maybe it was the wind, or maybe it was breathing. Approaching the trap door, I found myself trembling. My flashlight flickered, and I felt a sudden wave of nausea, as if my stomach was turning upside down. Then I heard it echoing my name, incredibly softly, from somewhere everywhere. I don't dare open the trap door anymore. I stepped back, my skin cold and goosebumps all over my arms. Every time the nerves in my body screamed to leave, I almost tripped over the top step in my haste to leave. The hairs on my neck tingled so intensely that they felt like pins and needles. That night, I tried to sleep with all the lights in the house on. But every time I closed my eyes, I felt a cold wind slither along the floorboards and wrap around my ankles. It felt like an invitation, or perhaps a warning. No matter what, I can't escape the feeling that I'm not alone. Over the next few days, my world became a series of strange events. The light bulb burned out at an alarming rate. The door opened by itself, squeaking, although I convinced myself it was just poor installation or the house was settling. But the strange things continued. An unsteady hum echoed through the vents, occasionally turning into what I swore was a low laugh, coming from somewhere in space. My reflection in the bathroom mirror looked paler, with dark circles under my eyes. I couldn't help but notice a certain emptiness on my face, as if I was no longer myself. When I tried to watch television or listen to music, static interrupted the normal signal at random intervals, sometimes accompanied by faint whispers, as if someone were standing right behind me, whispering inaudible things. None of these problems can be explained by simple faults in old wiring or plumbing. I felt stalked, as if the air in the house was watching me. At some point, I decided to search more closely for old documents. If the previous owner had left a warning, there might have been more clues. I flipped through the musty pages of the document, and began to find scattered notes, references to seeing a shadow moving behind walls and recurring nightmares of a drifting shape breathing in the darkness. Handwritten notes describe residents hearing voices through the vents, and feeling cold hands pulling along the back of their neck at night. The scribbles became more like madness as I flipped through them. Whoever wrote these accounts was convinced that something invisible shared the house. They all mentioned hearing the same muffled laughter, seeing movement out of the corner of their eyes, and feeling a presence just out of reach. As I read, my hands began to shake so violently that I could hardly hold the pages. My skin felt cold and my breathing became rapid. A deep fear originated from inside me. The warnings are real. Something was living in the house, between the walls, drawn in by any intrusion into its range. The last section covers an important indication: never open the hidden part. But I did exactly that. Fear turned into panic. The house seemed smaller, the walls pressing in made me feel like I was being squeezed from every angle. My vision occasionally blurred around the edges, and I experienced moments where I doubted my own perception of reality. I saw glimpses of shapes in the corners, flickers of something tall and contorted. Whenever I tried to turn on more lights, the bulbs would flicker in protest, casting nightmarish shadows across the rooms. My heart was constantly pounding, my hands were in a permanent state of trembling. I can't eat. Food turned to tasteless mush in my mouth, and my throat tightened every time I tried to swallow. I debated with myself whether or not to leave the house altogether, but a stubborn part of me refused to give up my possessions because of some invisible horror. Instead, I decided to confront it, or at least seal that door once and for all. Late one afternoon, as the sky outside faded to sullen gray, I woke myself up with a rush of adrenaline and headed back to the attic. Each step up the stairs made my limbs feel heavy, as if I were trudging through water. When I reached the attic, my heart was pounding so hard I was afraid it might burst. Still, I moved forward, until I reached the hatch. My hands were sweaty as I placed a heavy padlock on it, securing the latch with as much metal as possible, hoping that I would finally do something to seal this nightmare shut forever. I screwed in one nail at a time, anything to keep the door from opening easily. While working, I felt darkness gathering from every corner. My flashlight seemed weak in the overwhelming darkness. That feeling, as if a large shadow was swallowing my every step, made me feel surrounded. For a while, the attic felt very cold, my breath forming little clouds in the cold air. I heard a slight shuffling behind me, as if someone was moving, with a scraping sound like nails on wood. My eyes watered from a sudden gust of wind, which smelled rancid, somewhere between mold and stagnant water. A wave of terror ran down my spine, but I forced myself to drive each nail deeper. Each blow of the hammer reverberated with a resounding echo that seemed to carry a tone of defiance, as if the darkness were opposing my every effort. When the last nail was in, I felt a momentary joy mixed with a dizzying surge of fear. I felt the fury in the darkness, an invisible force withdrew my sealing efforts. Then it disappeared. My ears felt pressure, a muffled pop, and I thought I heard a whisper. It was probably my name, but distorted into a shape that made me tremble. I completed the makeshift barricade and fled the attic, stumbling down the stairs. My heart was pounding so hard that I had to lean against the wall to keep from collapsing. As I descended the stairs, I realized how labored my breathing had become. The whole house felt stuffy. But right after that, a fragile calm enveloped me. That night, I slept in short intervals of uneasy rest. I still wake up many times, drenched in cold sweat. But the house is quieter. The howling wind and strange laughter had reduced to faint whispers, no longer distant within the walls but gradually disappearing, at least partially, into the corners of my mind. For the next few days, I watched and waited, half expecting the boards to tear themselves apart, or that the terrible wind would continue. But that's not the case. The night is still disturbed. My dreams still feature oppressive darkness and the feeling of being watched. That feeling never completely went away, and I couldn't shake that anxiety. The shadows are always watching me, silently existing in every scene, every step I take. However, those experiences are not simply instinctive. My appetite slowly returned, little by little, and the anxiety gnawing in my chest began to loosen its grip. I can exist in my own home without feeling the immediate urge to run. Whenever I passed near the attic stairs, a chill ran across my skin, accompanied by the memory of that muffled voice. It's been weeks since I closed the hatches, but I'm not going to pretend my life is completely back to normal. Sometimes, the light flickers inexplicably. Occasionally, I caught the faint echo of something running past, or a breeze passing through the walls of unknown origin. And sometimes, when I'm dozing off, I feel a blast of cold air passing by my ear, carrying with it a vague whisper that sounds like my name. But that entity, or whatever it was, did not return to my life with the same fury. I still wonder if I'm just delaying another meeting. The words of the letter are still engraved in my mind. It feeds your fear. In quieter moments, I wonder about my own memories. Am I exaggerating those experiences? Maybe it's all just a product of stressful isolation and my overactive imagination. The possibility of a banal explanation is both comforting and disconcerting. It's more reassuring to believe that I imagined the whole ordeal out of anxiety. But a deep part of me knows that what I feel is real. The way my skin slithered across that attic, the wind that blew the boxes into the air, the invisible presence that whispered my name, they were not an illusion. I could easily dismiss them, but I have no intention of reopening that trap door. Whatever lies between those walls, wherever that hallway leads, would rather leave it sealed away forever. Perhaps it thrives on the acknowledgement of that fearful curiosity that forces us to look behind the curtain. If that's the case, my best bet is to deny that satisfaction. Still, every time the house groans or the air in the room turns unseasonably cold, I remember that my barriers may only be temporary. The oppressive weight has not completely disappeared. Sometimes, it just calms down. I thought I could feel it moving, like a thing trapped in a cage, tearing at time. Even now, the memory sends a tremor through my hands. As I write this, I can feel my pulse quicken, my temples tingling with each heartbeat. I found myself glancing at the ceiling, half expecting to see ripples in the wood or hear that giggle again. The feeling of insecurity persists and refuses to go away completely. I have accepted that some scars never heal completely. This house, with all its hidden passages and disturbing secrets, changed me. I live on the edge, standing between normalcy and something else. Something I still struggle to name or understand. Perhaps that's the cruelest truth. Once you've opened the door to your deepest fears, you'll never be able to completely close it. The atmosphere in this house always felt a little stuffy, but that night, it was really stuffy. As soon as I walked through the front door, an almost imperceptible chill enveloped me, like icy fingers touching the back of my neck. My skin tingled, and I had the uneasy feeling that someone or something was watching just outside my vision. I've lived in rented housing before, but I've never felt such a persistent atmosphere of insecurity. Even the silence in the house seemed alive with the faint echoes of things unseen. If I could have turned around and left right then, I probably would have. But a strange mixture of curiosity and fear forced me deeper inside. I suppose it all started innocently. I was simply trying to get my bearings in a new place, investigating each room to familiarize myself with the layout. The main floor is unremarkable. The hardwood floor creaked. Cream-colored walls and a few empty shelves. The second floor has the bedrooms, the mine at the end of a narrow hallway which at first glance made me feel the most comfortable. Even though I rented alone, it felt strangely alive, as if the presence of the previous tenants were still clinging to the corners. There's something about that concept that makes me both reassured and unsettled. The real intrigue began when I ventured down to the basement. An overhead light bulb buzzed and flickered, casting shadows that seemed to shift and vibrate along the cement walls. The basement itself was cluttered with half-rotted boxes, old furniture, and random junk that had probably accumulated for decades. I was rummaging around looking for an extension cord, and could have sworn I was packing when I came across a chest hidden behind a collapsed wooden table. The chest was scratched, the bright paint had long since faded. My heart pounded a little faster as I opened it. Inside, I found a smaller ornate wooden box, carved with swirling designs, patterns so intricate they seemed to move in the flickering light. When I lifted the lid, I was greeted by the stale smell of old paper and glue. And then, when I looked inside the box, I couldn't believe my eyes. What I saw was inexplicable. A small, but very heavy object, wrapped in a layer of worn gray fabric. I took it out, feeling a coldness spread from the object throughout my body. That feeling was strange, as if something that didn't belong to this world was present before my eyes. There are dozens, hundreds of photos. They were brittle and yellowed at the edges, with the distinctive musty smell of something forgotten for a very long time. Each photo depicts a room with 4 walls, a bed, and a window arranged exactly like my current bedroom. At first I thought they might just be images of a similar room, one that had been built. But as I scrolled through them, I noticed the details. The corner of the door, the special pattern on the window frame. That was my bedroom, or at least the previous version of it. In these photos, the room is decorated in a strange fashion, with strange symbols etched in dark paint spread across the walls. Some look like spirals or mazes, others look like runes, distorted letters in a script I couldn't decipher. The bed is covered with an almost ceremonial, unsettling sheet. The photo quality is poor, but the material looks shiny and dark like wet satin. A shape often lingers in the corner, only blurred in the first few shots. But over time, it became clearer, but never easier to understand. It looked human, but lacked a face. In some photos, its outline curves at unnatural angles, as if the camera had captured it while it was twitching or squirming just the right amount. My mouth was dry, and I realized I was breathing rapidly. I put the photos aside, closed the box, then reopened a part of me, hoping that I had created hallucinatory images. The photos, of course, are the same. Each photo is more confusing than the last. My heart pounded so hard in my ears that I almost didn't notice the faint creak from somewhere behind me. Maybe the sound of the wood is settling, or a draft is moving through the basement. However, in that moment, I felt certain that I was not alone. I quickly left the basement, slamming the door behind me. For hours, I tried not to think about what I had seen, trying to focus my attention on cleaning or organizing. But my thoughts kept returning to those symbols and that faceless shape. My skin tingles with the memory. I tried to reassure myself that it was just a strange thing, an old trash chest. Maybe those photos aren't even real, or maybe they're from a stage scene for some art project. But that explanation never really stuck in my mind. That night, I was sitting on my bed, scrolling aimlessly on my phone, but my eyes were glued to the wall. I can't stop imagining the symbols from the photos etched into the paint. Even though my walls were bare, I had the oppressive feeling that there was something just below the surface, waiting to be discovered. Sleep doesn't come easily. My breathing was shallow, and my temples throbbed with each heartbeat. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me down, but it was a haunting, restless sleep. In my dream, the faceless shadow looked at me from the corner, motionless but vibrating with hateful energy. I woke up drenched in sweat in the early morning hours, my heart pounding as if I were running a marathon. The room was silent, but I felt a presence just outside my sight. My breathing was ragged, cold sweat trickled down my neck. I had to use all my willpower to convince myself that it was just a dream. I reached over and turned on the light, my fingers shaking so violently I almost dropped it off the nightstand. In the days that followed, I tried to put my curiosity aside. The more I thought about the photos, the more my discomfort increased. However, the same urge that pushed me to open the chest in the first place kept gnawing at my mind. I needed to see those symbols in the context of my own space. This dynamic is as frustrating as it is irresistible. Finally, one evening I decided to hang one of my oldest photos on my bedroom wall. Maybe if I saw evidence that they weren't aligned, I could put the matter to rest. Walking up the narrow stairs to my bedroom felt like traversing a winding path in a nightmare. Each step seems heavier than the last. When I entered the room, my pulse quickened. I clutched a photo in my hand, one whose walls seemed to bleed with swirling symbols. The bed in that picture looks exactly like mine, even though the cover is tattered and dark in the photo. And in the upper right corner, near where a painting hangs, the photo reveals a specific symbol, a circle with lines radiating outward like a disappearing star. I moved the painting aside. Immediately, my stomach dropped. Beneath the paint on the wall, faint grooves can be seen. At first, the dents in the wall weren't obvious, just shallow dents, but if I looked closer, I could spy something. My hands trembled as I felt the ridges under my fingertips. They matched the icon in the photo almost perfectly. As soon as I realized it, a chill spread from my hand up my arm, as if the cold was seeping into my bones. My breath caught in my throat and I stumbled, almost dropping the photo. Every rational thought told me to leave the house, find a motel, anything to escape. But fear immobilized me. The door behind me suddenly seemed a mile away and the space around me seemed to shrink, like the walls were converging. For a brief second, I thought I caught a glimpse of some movement in the corner, just a fleeting movement. But when I turned around, there was nothing there. That night, I could hardly sleep. Every little creak in the house startled me awake. My heart refused to settle into its normal rhythm and my shirt clung to my sweat. The next day, my mind was in a fog of anxiety and lack of sleep. I found myself jumping every time I heard a small sound. The sound of a dripping faucet, the wind rattling on the windows, the hum of the refrigerator. The feeling of being watched grew stronger. I caught myself glancing over my shoulder every time I passed a mirror, half expecting to see something behind me. At one point, I decided to consult a local historian or maybe a neighbor about the house's past. I mentioned offhand that the house appeared to have an old basement with some strange items stored. No one gave a clear explanation, only vague comments about the house having existed for a long time and having changed hands many times. One person hinted that there were rumors that the house once belonged to an eccentric who held secret gatherings, although details were scarce. I noted the rumors but avoided pressing them further. There's something about hearing it from someone else that makes me feel a little too close to validation, and I'm not sure I want that. Night after night, I dreamed of that faceless figure. Sometimes it stands by my bed, sometimes it floats near the ceiling, and sometimes it waits in the corner. I rarely see it move, but I feel its presence intensify like an electric charge in the air. My heart beats so violently in my dreams that I wake up, gasping for air as adrenaline rushes through my veins. The fear was so obvious that even after waking up, I felt pressed against the bed, as if an invisible hand was holding me back. Finally, I decided to face the source. In the bedroom, it felt like I was marinated in fear. With each passing night there was a new test of terror. My logic tells me that if I find out more about those symbols, they will probably lose their power over me. So I went back to the basement, forcing myself to open that chest again. I spread out a few old photos under the weak flickering light of the basement light. I noticed a string of those icons. The first photos show a mostly empty room, just a bed and the faint outlines of symbols. As the pictures progress, the symbols become darker and more complex. A disturbing transformation takes place in space. A progression from a light track. The faceless figure appears near the center in later photos, always leaning in an odd position. Occasionally it looked like there were human figures, but the images were too blurry to be certain. I found a stack of handwritten notes hidden underneath some photos. The handwriting is jagged, as if the author is in a hurry or agitated. Most were illegible, but scattered. Phrases jumped out of the darkness. Watchers can't sleep, warning, the air tastes bitter, the temperature in the basement has. I collapsed, locking the basement door behind me. My body trembled, my hands twitched involuntarily and my mind swirled with questions of whether I was imagining the sounds and my tension. I tried to release a part of me myself. The windows made the shadows sway on the walls alive, taking shape, the intermittent thunder emphasizing my anxiety. I sat in my bedroom with all the lights on, checking every corner, half expecting to see that shape in my light. The figure usually stands in the air at that angle. Feeling thick like walking through a spider web, I noticed the floorboards were a bit uneven and something forced me to put one underneath it. I found a small compartment containing a notebook, covered with stuck pages, but containing no obvious markings. Chills were in my body and my mouth was so dry that I couldn't swallow. The painting hid part of this symbol, as if someone was trying to keep it or at least out of my sight. I returned the painting to its correct location. All the while, my heart was rumbling in my chest. I was so upset, I almost dropped the hammer into the room, feeling charged like static electricity before a storm hits. Once the painting was secured, I felt a subtle relief, as if I had become tense, a feeling of peace. I made a decision. I packed my toiletries, essential clothes, the trunk containing the photos and loaded my car. I will not be in this house anymore. Whether this threat is real or a product of my own paranoia, I cannot continue to live on this edge of terror. In my bathroom mirror, my chest ached as I turned the corner, the feeling of breaking through the pain as I couldn't do anything. I don't ask myself when I'm somewhere, I can't. I can't. I don't question myself when I'm at my level. I thought I felt a presence standing just outside the light of the lamp, that my pulse would spike and cold sweat would strip my shirt as I glanced, half expecting to see that silhouette in the corner. Even in a different setting, I still can't explain it. That's when my mind questioned whether my experience was actually real or not. I slowly unravel under the weight of my own worries, but every time my skin is irritated by a random noise, every time I wake up from a nightmare, drenched in sweat, I'm reminded that some of my horrors sometimes felt difficult to begin with. This week, my heart pounded against my ribs like a frantic drum, even before my feet touched the floor. I knew something was wrong when this house, in the early hours, seemed alive with my stress. The ceiling lamp, the weak morning light, made my mornings an immersion in an oppressive fear I couldn't name. I've always been an early riser, motivated by the desire to watch the sun rise into a warm, red sky. There's something peaceful about making it big, a reminder of life and small joys. Every morning, I step outside, which brings me comfort. The smell of wet grass, leaves in the gentle breeze, small joys always keep me in this morning space. As soon as I crossed the threshold, the atmosphere seemed strange. There was no breeze to stir the plants, and worse, there was an uneasy feeling under my bare feet. The grass, which usually felt soft and damp at this hour, now felt cold and strange. I couldn't understand why the footprints in the grass were so clear, bold and evenly spaced, as if some animal had passed by. I felt an anxious tension in my stomach, a cold sweat along my forehead. My breathing became heavy, as if someone had passed by in the night, maybe a drifter or someone in hiding. I decided to follow the footprints, until they disappeared into a darker patch near the fence. A thick and dark area. Turning around, I forced myself to continue methodically sweeping the yard. The footprints remained undisturbed, but my suspicions could not be easily dismissed. I continued with my routine, reminding myself that perhaps normalcy was the best antidote to paranoia. But as soon as I opened the door on Monday morning, I heard a thump as strong as high heels, so hard that I could barely think as the footsteps stopped, caught in my throat. I took a step forward, but there was nothing but footprints. This time, they are scattered around the house. I walked closer and felt more impressed, like there was something lurking around here, watching me. I realized I needed a system to record movement around my property. Later that day, I personally installed the cameras strategically around the porch, the corners of the house, facing that dark corner. I felt a sense of relief, convinced that if those steps returned, would have solid proof of what I had done. I have created a secure system. But as soon as I finished my work, I felt another feeling, a strange prominence in the space. It was as if the mass of sensations made everything even clearer. I imagined I could hear faint scratching sounds near the window. Every time I stopped to listen, my mouth flapped in nervousness. When I checked the video feed from my phone app, everything appeared normal, but there were error messages, as if the cameras had lost power. The unbelievable feeling made me rush to the window. My trembling fingers touched the glass and I looked out at the grass moving in a slow ripple, as if something large was passing by. But nothing. My breath caught in my throat, and a part of me couldn't trace the withdrawal as the camera feed suddenly blinked, coming back to life. My feeling of fear turned into a deep disappointment. This, I thought, got past my defenses, as if it were mocking my efforts. That evening, I called a friend who lived a few miles away and explained that strange things were happening, as I felt broken. My stomach whispered that this phenomenon would not go away just because I chose to ignore it. The next morning, my body felt like a wound. I woke up from a restless sleep, drenched in sweat, gasping for breath, and every muscle in my body was tense. But nothing, I felt like something was hunting me, or at least studying me. Determined not to be a prisoner in my own home, I ventured out at midday. The sunlight had chased away most of the darkness, and I thought perhaps this would weaken whatever was clinging to me. But as I closed my eyes to steady my breathing, I felt a wind sweep across my face, making me shiver, despite the warm sunlight. For a moment, I thought I heard a low sigh from the back door. It wasn't a tapping sound like the previous times, but a strange test, like something sliding on a rough surface, causing my throat to tighten to the point of pain. I forced myself out of bed, feeling my heartbeat falter, unrecognizable human silhouettes, no animal shapes, just a faint impression of twisted space, as if the space itself was warping my sanity. Maybe I was hallucinating, or maybe the stress triggered some form of paranoia. Physical evidence, whether it was footprints or malfunctioning cameras, made me realize that this wasn't just my mind making it up. I can no longer deny that. I experienced emotions of confusion, electric shocks of fear. Hopefully I'll see something clearer, but it just makes me feel even more confused. I stood staring at the yard, what felt like a world of possibilities lurking in every blade of grass, concealing an invisible threat. The sun slowly lowered again, its beat felt like it was hitting my chest, and each breath felt like I was inhaling a razor blade. Time drags on endlessly, every minute is a tense race. A shape distorted in the air, like a heat wave rising from asphalt, it moved but unlike any normal creature. My body froze, my heart pounded so hard that I felt like it was shaking my entire body. I struggled to keep my flashlight from flickering, moving at the edges of my vision. Finally, the footsteps faded, normal sounds returned, the chirping of crickets in the trees. I felt drained of energy, every muscle trembling. My whole body was lost, unable to focus on anything, only knowing that I was completely exhausted. For the first time, I truly acknowledged that this thing, whatever it was gripping me, and I couldn't escape it. When morning came, I felt like I had aged a decade in a single night. I looked in the mirror, a strange face appeared. What I went through could not have been just the illusion of a stressed mind. A cold clarity made me realize I needed to do something. I cannot live in this fear forever, at least not long enough to gather my mental strength and find a way to face it. I threw some items into my bag, decided to drive, locked the door, and glanced around, expecting a final confrontation. But as I drove away from the house, the property before my eyes appeared empty in the sunlight. Everything looked suspiciously normal. Except for the deep impressions on the grass, there was still a certain sign that made me feel uneasy. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, feeling my heart pounding, unable to escape the feeling of being watched. When I glanced at the dark corner of the yard, I felt like the darkness was almost hitting me like a living creature, making me unable to rest assured. Although I tried to banish that feeling, it still followed me, like a new terror. I couldn't help but feel that something might follow me, even though I tried to leave. My mentality started to become tired and confused. I couldn't determine whether it was real or just my own stress eating away at my sanity. I feel the tension and anxiety that cannot be put into words but clings to my mind, like an invisible ghost lingering in my thoughts. Every night, those images, strange sounds, and even footprints that I cannot explain, keep lurking in the space around me. Those unpleasant feelings wouldn't let me go, and I couldn't separate reality from the nightmares engraved in my mind. On long nights when I sat among the pages of ancient books in the library, with the quiet atmosphere as if time had stopped, everything around me became blurry and unnatural. I could feel the cracks in space, as if they were sucking away every shred of sanity I had left. The shadows in the bookshelves seemed to have weight, and with every step, every time I opened a page, I felt something strange, like a presence was watching me. At first, I just thought it was fatigue and stress from volunteering at the library. But gradually, I realized that something more strange and scary was creeping into this space. It wasn't just the weak light from the hanging lamps, but the feeling like everything around me was hissing, threatening to engulf me in darkness. I tried to calm myself, protect myself from chaotic thoughts. But when I heard a small, gentle whisper like a call coming from somewhere in the room, I couldn't resist. A cold feeling enveloped me, and every time I turned to look into the darkness, I felt like something was watching me from behind, always waiting to touch me. Even when I tried not to look, I still felt that presence, as if a figure was standing waiting, staring at me. At that time, I couldn't tell if it was real or just a product of my disturbed imagination. But I decided that I had to face it. By continuing to work, continuing to turn the pages, I convinced myself that if I didn't react, if I wasn't afraid, that presence would disappear. But that night, while I was in the library, a gentle sound rang out, a cold wind swept past, making the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I can't pretend I didn't hear anything anymore. And as I looked into the pages, I saw my own reflection in the pale light. My eyes were wide open, filled with fear. The darkness seemed to swallow me whole, and every time I tried to escape, an invisible force kept pulling me closer. I tried to leave, but part of me couldn't. It felt like I was trapped in this very space, between the past and the present, between the inexplicable and the reality of what I was feeling. The footprints in the grass, the strange symbols on the wall, and that faceless shadow still follow me, a reminder that I cannot escape the past. And whether I leave that house or not, I know that the darkness will always be with me, waiting to return, like an inescapable part of me. Fear is not something that can be erased or forgotten, it is a part of me. The darkness seemed to swallow everything around me, and only the sound of each footstep echoed in the quiet space. With every step I took, I felt vibrations that seemed to penetrate through the solid wooden floor, making me confused as to what was following me. I didn't dare turn around, didn't dare look behind me, but the feeling was undeniable. There was a presence, something incomprehensible but clear chasing me in the darkness. At the bottom of the stairs, I gasped for breath, my hands shaking as I hastily locked the door behind me. But even as I did that, I still felt a sense of fear seeping into every fiber of my being. The feeling that I am no longer alone in this house is still intact. My legs were weak and I couldn't stop the thoughts racing through my head. I couldn't get rid of the feeling that things weren't what I thought they were. I sat panting, trying to concentrate on what was actually happening, but images from the library, strange photos and inexplicable signs, kept spinning in my mind. Not just a nightmare, not just what I imagined. Every time I close my eyes, those images reappear, as if a part of me is still trapped in that space. I remember the last time I walked out of the library, feeling like a shadow, surrounded by unanswered questions. Strange sounds still echoed in my ears, and an unpleasant feeling, like a shadow always waiting, kept tormenting my mind. Part of me longed for quiet, but the other part couldn't deny the fear that still lingered. It was not something that was easy to let go, and I realized that I had not only faced the fear in that space, but also with myself, the things hidden deep in my mind that I had never dared to face. Now, every time I look into the darkness, I feel it is still there, no matter how hard I try to avoid it. Every step in this life is like a new challenge, facing inexplicable obsessions. A part of me is haunted by those images and sounds. And no matter how much I move on, even if I try to forget, I know that it will continue to follow me. The feeling of tension did not let me go. Even when I left the building, the light of day could not dispel the darkness I carried in my mind. Despite my efforts to appear calm, every step felt like a battle with my own fear. The sounds, images, and feelings I experienced in the library kept lingering in my head, making it impossible to escape them, no matter where I was. Every time I close my eyes, I see the same scene, the pages flipping frantically, the shelves trembling as if something were pulling them down. I could feel a presence in every dark corner, invisible eyes watching me from somewhere unseen. I tried to explain that it was just too much stress, but some part of me knew that I couldn't escape something that I couldn't explain. I asked myself, had I entered some game that I had no control over? Had an event awakened something I couldn't explain? Is the library, with all its silence and ancient bookshelves, a place that holds only intellectuals, or does it hide something much bigger, deeper, and more terrible? As I looked around my new home, I began to feel a vague but profound sense that it was not entirely peaceful. Dark corners, simple walls, and idyllic views seemed to carry something intangible but clearly present. I don't dare look at those corners for too long, because I'm afraid I'll see images I don't want to see. Doubt and fear pile up on top of each other, creating an unending cycle. I never thought that a seemingly ordinary place could have such power to change me. Even though I left, I couldn't escape the feeling that things were just beginning. What I went through will not easily fade away, and what I took with me from that house, from that library, will continue to stick with me, no matter how hard I try. And then, it all changed overnight, when I walked into that library. A strange feeling overtook me, as if I was entering a long-forgotten space where everything was waiting for me to return, waiting for me to open a door I never realized I had opened. The memory of those nights in the library continued to haunt me. It was like a never-ending nightmare, a constant loop that I couldn't escape. The silence in the library became something palpable, a heavy mass of matter suspended in space, filled with invisible traces of certain forces. Every time I pass a dark corner, I can't help but feel that something is waiting for me, whether I turn around or not. Not an ordinary feeling of fear, but an urge to find the secret, even though I know that it could lead to destruction. I can't shake the feeling that that library is always with me, no matter how many times I leave it. Strangely enough, fear is not something I can touch, but something that silently exists within me, clinging to memories that I cannot erase. No matter where I go, no matter what I do, I still feel that I haven't escaped it. Some force, something not human, is lurking in the books and corridors of that library, always watching and drawing me back. I wondered if I could truly escape what had happened, or if I had been marked, like those who had come and gone before me, to be drawn into this vortex. Those memories never truly fade. Every time I think I've escaped, they find a way to return, like a whisper echoing in the quiet space, waiting for me to listen again. I am no longer the same Matthew as before, the proud and focused project manager. A part of me was changed forever, haunted by the shadows of the old library and the things I couldn't yet understand. Things that are untouchable, inexplicable, but part of my reality, unavoidable. No matter how hard I tried, I felt like I was on a never-ending journey, where every step was filled with unbearable secrets. And when I wonder if I will return to that library, or if it will call to me again, I know that it is not a question of if, but of when it will happen. But the sound continued, soft but steady, as if someone was moving something heavy in the darkness. I stopped, my heart pounding, and my eyes glanced toward the conference room, where I knew no one was still there. Every time I try to concentrate on work, the sound rings out, making it impossible for me to escape the feeling like something is lurking in the silence. At first I assumed it was just the normal noise of an old building, maybe a window shaking, or maybe the cold air system making strange sounds. However, the cold feeling in the air made it impossible for me to easily dismiss it. I began to feel like there was an invisible presence in this room, as if someone was looking at me from a dark corner that I couldn't see. That feeling grew stronger as the sound got closer and closer, as if someone was walking towards me from the hallway. My heart beat faster and I couldn't help but turn around, but there was only darkness and closed doors. I felt a blast of cold air from behind, as if someone was standing right behind me, even though I couldn't hear footsteps. A shiver ran down my spine, but when I turned around, there was nothing but the endless silence of the empty office. I tried to push these thoughts away, telling myself that it was just stress, a product of my mind facing a stressful day at work. But the uneasy feeling in my chest still didn't leave. I tried to finish my report, but the more I tried, the more my uneasiness escalated. It felt like there was a presence hovering around me, waiting for a moment to appear. The space becomes too quiet. Every little noise in the office was a reminder that I was no longer alone, that there was something out there. Every noise in the darkness became more distinct, the sound of furniture being dragged, the absent footsteps, all as if aimed at me. I felt like I was being followed, but couldn't find anyone. My breathing became heavier and heavier, and I couldn't help but feel that this night wouldn't be like any other night. I couldn't fight this feeling, a feeling I couldn't explain. And when I decided to leave my desk, stand up and check things out, a feeling of fear mixed with my irresistible curiosity. But once I stepped out of the office, the darkness seemed to begin to envelop me again, and I was no longer sure whether I was escaping something or moving closer into my own nightmare. That feeling came back again, an invisible, yet still very clear presence. My heart beat harder, and my body felt frozen, unable to move. I couldn't make out what the sound was, but every nerve in my body screamed that there was something in that room, and it wasn't someone familiar. I felt fear flickering in the air, as if that very space was watching me, not by accident, but on purpose. I took a step back, my hand still pressed against the glass door. The faint sound continued, as if something was moving very slowly in the darkness, avoiding light, avoiding detection. The darkness in the meeting room seemed to have its own shape, as if the chairs and tables had changed positions, no longer the same as before. They looked as if they could move on their own, forced into unnatural angles, forming an uneasy, dense wall. A cold wind suddenly blew through the hallway, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. There seemed to be no reason for me to feel this way, but that fear still clung to me, unable to let go. I tried to control myself, took a deep breath and silently told myself I had to get out of here. But something still holds me back, as if I'm tied to this place, unable to escape. I turned around and walked away, each step as if it were a challenge, a struggle with myself. The creaking sounds under my feet in the dark made me even more alert. Everything seemed incredibly quiet, and I began to wonder if what I heard and felt were a figment of my imagination. But for a brief moment, I felt something was wrong, a presence was still there, watching, waiting. Finally, I walked out of the building, leaving behind an inexplicable feeling, as if events were beyond my control. I'm not sure if I can find peace, but I know one thing for sure, I can't go back to that place. Not now, not when those secrets and presences are still waiting behind every wall. My chest tightened, and for an instant, I felt the loneliness in this room, as if I was alone in a dark world, and something was waiting. A fear that came from deep down, not from what I saw, but from what I felt, as if there was an invisible presence watching my every move. With every movement, every breath, I felt the shadow of the threat still near. My eyes scanned the space, trying to find a logical reason for what was happening, but nothing could explain it. That feeling was too real, too strong to be just an imagination. No matter how much I wanted to convince myself that this was just a coincidence, that I was just too stressed, I couldn't escape the feeling that something out of this world existed in this room. The sound of that breathing, sporadic and broken, lingered heavily in the air. A sigh containing a strange languor and heaviness, as if trying to escape from a deep darkness. There was no one there, no one answered my greeting, but the feeling I got was clear. I'm not the only one in this room. And that makes me feel more insecure than ever. Without a doubt, I knew I couldn't ignore this. Every time I tried to convince myself that everything was just a coincidence, a part of me was reminded that I was standing on the boundary between the real world and something dark, inexplicable. The whispers in the air, the coldness of the space around me, all of it made me wonder if I was dreaming. I took a step back, my hand still on the partition, but I couldn't turn back immediately. Part of me wanted to run away, but another part urged me to stay, to face this, to face what was waiting in that darkness. That feeling continued to gnaw at me, as if it was pulling me into an invisible hole that I couldn't escape from. I couldn't leave this place without understanding, but I also couldn't bear this fear any longer. Every step I take, I feel that presence closer, like a shadow that cannot be touched, but is always present, always watching. I stood there, unable to move. My whole body seemed paralyzed by panic, the dim light from the fluorescent lights flickering on and off, making the space more strange and mysterious than ever. My heart pounded like a storm in my chest, each beat reverberating in my ears, as if I was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't escape from. Hollow moans rang out from behind the fence, as soft as a whisper, but enough to push my fear to the breaking point. I tried to step back, but my feet felt like they were rooted to the floor. A cold, heavy feeling enveloped me, as if the air in the hallway had changed, becoming thick and heavy. My skin felt numb, as if something invisible was surrounding me, looking at me from all sides. My mind was spinning, trying to make sense, but everything was blurry and chaotic. I want to run, want to escape this place, but my body feels frozen, unable to move. Those scratching sounds and moans kept echoing in space, each wave of sound permeating my mind, as if something was very close, approaching me. In the darkness, invisible hands were pulling things out, as if some force was controlling everything in this room. I knew I couldn't stay any longer. Suddenly, the light flickered again and the room returned to normal. But I don't believe my eyes anymore. The fear subsided a bit, but I couldn't let go of the chair I was pulling, couldn't stop feeling like something was looking for me, following me. I've endured this silence long enough to know that it's not a joke. Memories of strange noises and strange feelings remained like a dark shadow, unable to be dismissed. No matter where I ran away, these things would still follow me. Whenever I stop thinking about them, they find a way to come back, haunting me, making me feel like I can never truly escape them. I couldn't stop repeating those questions in my head, even though I knew they wouldn't help me escape the fear that haunted me. Is there really a reasonable explanation? Or is it all just my tired imagination, fueled by long pent-up tension? I tried to convince myself that maybe I had created all of this myself, maybe everything was just a weird coincidence. But the more I thought about it, the more I felt that nothing about what I experienced was random or easily explained. I closed my eyes and tried to take a deep breath, to trick myself into thinking I was safe, but the strange feeling still wouldn't let me go. Even when I was sitting in my apartment, far away from all that had happened, I felt that presence, as if it was still there, waiting in the dark, watching me from the hidden corners of space. Every slight noise, every shadow passing through the light from outside the window, makes my heart jump. The air in the apartment was still thick, as if what had happened had never ended, but had only temporarily subsided, waiting to return again. Dreams still haunt me every night, long hallways, closed doors and incomprehensible whispers continue to linger in my mind, even though I try to forget them. I knew there was something inexplicable, a thin line between reality and something I couldn't understand, still somewhere in that room, in every crevice, in every strange sound. Can I continue living like this? Will one day, when I think I've left it all behind, could the ghosts of my past return and try to drag me down again? The answer will probably forever remain a secret, an unanswered question. But what I am sure of is that, no matter how far I run away, that fear still sticks with me, silently waiting and finding a way to creep into my weakest moments. Your story is truly profound and haunting, seemingly beyond normal explanation, blurring between reality and inexplicable fears. The details you describe, from strange noises, to images of furniture moving on their own, to the cold silence in dark hallways, all create an extremely tense and scary atmosphere. Even though you may try to explain it rationally, the feelings and experiences that cannot be denied still cling to you, making it impossible for you to completely shake them off. The profound change in yourself, from quitting your old job to dreading working late, is a testament to what you've been through. Sometimes, inexplicable experiences leave a lasting mark, not only in memories but also in feelings, in the way we perceive the world around us. Fear does not necessarily come from something specific, but can just be a feeling, a vague presence, but strong enough to completely change the way you live, the way you feel about everything. Dreams of endless hallways, flashing lights, and strange noises that seem to haunt you, a reminder of the unexplained, may be a testament to a deep truth that you cannot fully understand. Regardless, I hope you find peace and well-being, even though it may be a long and arduous process. Fear, although intense and difficult to extinguish, will eventually become part of the healing process. The feeling you describe, the confusion and nagging grip of something inexplicable, is truly a profound obsession. Fear does not always come from obvious things, but sometimes from uncertainty, the feeling that something is watching, or an invisible presence in space. Those are the biggest fears, the things that we cannot fully understand but can feel deeply, and this keeps our minds racing. Quiet nights, when you feel a presence in the space around you, may be a form of the mind protecting itself from an inexplicable feeling. That feeling is not easy to get rid of, because uncertainty is one of the scariest things. You are living with the constant suspicion that a part of you is still caught up in strange and inexplicable events, things that are beyond our reason. But part of you knows that feeling can't be easily denied. Quiet hallways, locked doors, inexplicable noises, they are like unknowns that you cannot forget. Even though you may have decided to leave behind everything related to that place, your mind won't let you forget it completely. You left a part of yourself in those hallways, a part that could never escape the feeling that something remained, waiting, even as you walked out of it. That feeling, that there is something that has not completely left, a part of the past that still clings to you, will certainly continue to haunt you in your dreams, in your lonely moments. It's hard to cope with feelings that we can't explain, but one thing is clear: places and spaces where we don't feel safe, even in the slightest, can always become part of a lasting nightmare. The unsettling feeling you describe about the warehouse really makes me think of those moments when the surrounding space becomes heavy, almost alive, and every slightest sound carries a terrifying power. Those stories about ghosts, whether you believe it or not, seem to have begun to stick to your mind, making you feel stressed and confused on lonely nights. During the day, the space is filled with laughter, work and bustle, like a protective shell. But when the light goes out, when the noise of the day ends, you begin to realize that the quiet places, the dark, unclear corners of space become the fears that linger in the mind. That's the beauty of silence. It allows your worries to spread more strongly. The feeling of ghosts, whether legendary or real, is more than just a supernatural image. It's a combination of stories, of uncertainty, and what they leave in the mind. Every step in that space, where there are no more sounds of forklifts or colleagues' voices, only your own footsteps echo as a sign of loneliness and confusion. The dim light in the hallway only highlights the dimness of the hidden corners, making your mind even more stressed and burdened. And the stories, no matter how hard you try to explain or dismiss them, still keep coming back to your mind, like an indelible shadow, silently following every step you take. You wonder if anything really exists, or if they are just images created by anxiety and fatigue. But there's no denying that your fear is not something that can easily be erased by reason alone. What you feel, whether real or not, becomes an integral part of your experience of that place. Maybe there are places, spaces, where silence is not just the absence of sound, but a waiting, a reminder that there are things that cannot be explained, things that you will never be able to fully understand. And you, even though you are not superstitious, still cannot avoid feeling insecure about things that no one can explain satisfactorily. Fear does not always come from direct sight but from uncertainty, from undiscovered mysteries. The feeling of numbness and anxiety inside you is really strong. The details you describe about the warehouse, the flickering lights, the air filled with eerie silence, and the mysterious ghost of the man in overalls sweeping the floor seem to create a picture of tension and mystery. Strange sounds, unclear images, and the feeling of being watched can't help but make you feel that something is wrong, something beyond what can be explained rationally. The scene you encountered in the warehouse, the man's figure, his repetitive movements, was not just a simple event, but something terrifying, strange and incomprehensible. That uncertainty makes your fear even stronger, like something not belonging to this world is lurking in the dark corners of the building. Even though you try to explain the situation and tell yourself that maybe it was just your imagination or some unclear problem in your mind, that feeling still couldn't go away. You start to feel like there is something always watching, listening to your every step. You also notice that not only you but also other colleagues have similar strange experiences, and there seems to be an invisible presence in the space that you cannot explain. This certainly has a strong influence on your mind and feelings. The nights you have to work late, the feeling of insecurity always smolders inside you, unable to be erased no matter how hard you try to rationalize it. Stories about ghosts and strange events only add to the instability in your mind, and perhaps, these stories are not imagination. They may be part of the reality you are facing, a reality that you do not want to understand, but it still haunts you, not giving you peace. In the end, you choose to leave, a decision that is not only physical but also a way to resolve your fears, to find peace. But, as you said, an invisible shadow still lingers, not easily shaken off. That shadow is the uncertainty, the fear that has never disappeared, still exists in the hallways and dark corners of your mind. The feeling of insecurity and traces of this strange presence still haunt you, even when you try to explain everything in the most reasonable way. You have tried to face your fears, proving that you are not caught up in hallucinations or fantasies. But the repeated events in the warehouse, especially the faint footprints and heavy shadows, seem to be deeply imprinted on your mind. The feeling that something invisible is watching and waiting, even if only for brief moments, makes you feel even more unable to completely escape that presence. Shadows move when you cannot see, and that suffocating darkness is like a strong force, not only in the warehouse but also in your mind. Although there are times when you try to explain everything as a product of fatigue, the truth remains that a certain presence is still there, in the dark corners of the place where you work. That, although not physically harmful, deeply damages your sense of reality. A feeling of being cut off between reason and strange impressions that you cannot explain. You can't help but feel the lingering strangeness, even after you've left that hallway. Its shadow still follows you, and although you try to forget, the nightmares and hauntings continue to repeat in your dreams. All you can do is keep living, but know that a part of you has been changed forever, a part that is always waiting for something you cannot control. That feeling of obsession continues to stick with you, even though you've tried to turn a new page. That blurry shape, with its repetitive movements, is like a piece of music constantly playing in your mind. You have gone through a series of jobs, from the tension in the meeting room to flying a plane in the vast sky, but that darkness never leaves. It appears again in strange forms, like a dark spot in space, difficult to explain or deny. Even during the calm hours of flying, when you're doing your job, when everything seems stable, that feeling finds a way to return. You see the faint outline of something, not an object, but something your mind cannot grasp, something fleeting but strong enough to make your heart pound, making you unable to escape that insecurity. Just when you turn to look, the shape disappears again, adding to the feeling of unreality and incomprehensibility. It is the frustration in that moment that makes you unable to concentrate on work, your arms are tired, and the operations are difficult while flying the plane. But the strange thing is, that feeling, no matter how many times it happens, you still cannot give up the suspicion that there is something waiting for you, something beyond your control. Even though you have let go of the feeling of fear, it still remains, like an indelible mark, bothering you in the most seemingly ordinary moments. This feeling, an inexplicable tension, slowly creeps into every part of your life. Small details, inexplicable things, still linger in your mind, blurring reality. You try to find ways to explain them, from the airplane systems to the meetings, from the strange lights in the windows to the constant nagging feelings. But the truth is, you can't find the solution to every strange thing happening around you. When you work, your eyes can't seem to stop at vague images. Your mind can't focus, as if something has blocked your train of thought. During briefings, when you hear technical explanations, they are just idle words that can no longer enter your mind. You feel vague, as if you are standing outside of everything, no longer able to connect with the reality around you. Even as you try to convince yourself that everything is normal, part of you knows that it isn't. There is an invisible presence, something that cannot be touched but makes you feel haunted. Idle thoughts about something about to happen constantly appear, making you unable to feel secure. Just when you heard the leader's question about whether you felt okay, that look from him made you realize that you still couldn't get rid of that feeling. Every day, you have to face unexplainable things. No matter how hard you try to walk through them as if they don't exist, a part of you cannot deny the fact that there is something waiting, something invisible but strong, clinging to you without mercy. Dreams, glimpses, and the feeling of an invisible world that is present in every moment of life, they still cling to you. The feeling of being watched, the unspeakable fear, kept rising strongly, like a shadow that never left. As much as you try to convince yourself that you're imagining it all yourself, part of you knows that's not the case. The darkness is always there, just a moment of distraction, and it will be present, lurking in hidden corners, just outside of your vision. At night, when the air becomes silent, everything becomes even scarier. The faint glow of the lights illuminated the runway like a crack in the stillness, highlighting the curves and shadows. And in those moments, when you feel the ground beneath your feet trembling, the existence of something invisible, intangible but present in every step, becomes even clearer. You wondered if you were being paranoid, but all your senses protested. It was a feeling too real, too intense to ignore. The flashlight in your hand, no matter how hard it tries to shine, doesn't seem to be able to dispel the darkness, but only adds to that feeling. Every step, every sound, every breeze brings insecurity, as if everything is standing quietly waiting for something inevitable. That fear is not something that can be easily turned off. It haunts you in every dream, in every quiet moment of the night. Even though you try to forget, that feeling still sticks with you, still lingers in your mind, like a reminder that there are things that cannot be explained, and we may never be completely free from them. The feeling of fear spread throughout my body, like a darkness hidden deep in my living space. I tried to ignore it, but it kept following me, like an invisible, extremely real presence that I couldn't explain. Strange sounds and disturbances that I couldn't explain had become part of my routine, making my living space no longer feel as safe as before. Since I started noticing small changes in the kitchen, things have become unmanageable. Cooking utensils no longer in their rightful places, lids rolling on the floor, all could be explained away as confusion, but over time, my sense of unease only grew. Every time I step into the kitchen, I feel like an invisible force is pulling me into another world where I no longer have control over what's happening. One night, I could no longer close my eyes to these strange phenomena. I decided to face it, even though I may never find the answer. I stood quietly behind the kitchen door, darkness enveloping me. I could hear a slight scratching sound, like someone was secretly moving things around in my kitchen, but when I looked, there was only darkness and silence. It seems like something is watching me, lurking in the hidden corners of this space, just waiting for me to step back. I tried to shake off that feeling, but it still stuck with me, like an inseparable part of this life. This invisible presence, while not something that could be seen or touched, was enough to make me feel like I was being watched, as if I was living in a space that didn't entirely belong to me anymore. A feeling of heaviness and tension enveloped me as I stood there in the kitchen, my eyes focused on every shadow, every dark spot lingering in the room, as if those shadows were silently observing me. I could feel the silence suddenly overwhelming the space around me, like an invisible force holding its breath, ready to explode at any moment. Every step I took felt like a challenge, as I told myself that I had everything under control, that I had closed the door carefully and not allowed any strange phenomena to enter this space. But the truth is, I can't shake the feeling that there's something different, a presence I can't explain, watching from some hidden corner of the kitchen. Even though the cooking utensils were arranged neatly, the next morning, they were moved, sometimes in the wrong place, sometimes reaching out of my reach as if an invisible hand was controlling them. I don't know if I'm going crazy or not, but my discomfort is growing. Small sounds, such as the slight rubbing of objects and the sound of metal hitting each other, became nightmares that lasted all night. No matter how much I tried, I couldn't deny that these phenomena were deeply ingrained in my mind, and I felt pushed into a vicious cycle that I couldn't escape. But despite these fears, I am determined not to let them control me. I locked the door, turned on the lights, and told myself that I was no longer afraid. I stood in the kitchen, staring into the shadows, but instead of looking for confirmation that I had mastered everything, I felt something different. A cold feeling rose in my heart, as if something not of this world existed right in this very space. I continued to clean, but the feeling of insecurity wouldn't leave me. Every time my unconscious gaze glanced at the pantry door, my heart beat faster. It felt like there was something waiting just outside my vision, something watching me, silently waiting to be exposed. I tried to push these thoughts out of my head, reminding myself that everything was just a play of the imagination, but the nagging anxiety kept returning. Every night, when I turn off the lights and lie in the dark, I can't stop imagining those strange scenes, pots and pans, all moving, pulled by an invisible force, as if a ghostly hand was controlling them. These nights, sleep is difficult, and every time I wake up in the middle of the night, I feel that something is wrong. Small noises, whether they were creaking objects or whispers in the wind, startled me awake. And each time, the heavy feeling, the feeling like there was something waiting for me in the dark, came back, stronger. Finally, I couldn't stand it anymore. I decided I would not let fear rule my life any longer. One day, I walked into the kitchen and opened the pantry door, determined to face my fear, but this time I didn't feel the invisible cold from moving objects. Everything was still in the same place, nothing had changed, nothing but heavy silence. Even so, I still can't explain that feeling in my heart. It is not a reality or an illusion. It is a vague presence, a ghost that cannot be seen, but can be felt. The confusion did not leave me, and I realized that perhaps a part of me would never be able to understand what had happened in this house. I stood there, unable to move, eyes wide open, looking at the messy pile of things in the dim light. Each item seems to have a life of its own, arranged in a strange and absurd way. The feeling of fear was like a cold blanket surrounding me, squeezing every corner of my mind. I couldn't understand what was going on, but what I saw was clear: pots and pans scattered on the floor, with no reason to explain the chaos. I wanted to scream for help, to say that someone had entered my house, but there was no trace of another person's presence. My whole body felt numb, my heart was beating so hard that I could feel every beat. Despite everything, I couldn't deny the strange feeling that something very real existed in these things, something that couldn't be explained by ordinary factors. Unable to bear it anymore, I hurriedly walked into the kitchen, looked through every corner again, but nothing had changed. It was the same chaos, just like when I walked in before going to bed, only with an added strange feeling in the air. At that moment, I knew I couldn't escape something unexplainable. There is an invisible but clear presence, something invisible but very real. A fear that was no longer simply imagined, it had become a part of me, like my own shadow in the darkness. Now, every time I walk into the kitchen, I feel as if there are eyes watching me from the darkness, watching my every move. The feeling of being watched couldn't be shaken off, even when I tried to reason, tried to find a reasonable explanation. And every time I look at ordinary objects in my house, I wonder if they are really ordinary objects, or if there is something I cannot understand hiding in them. The door closed behind me, but I didn't feel any peace of mind. My chest felt heavy, my heart rate showed no signs of slowing down, and my body trembled in panic. I tried to breathe deeply, trying to regain composure, but the fear became even more overwhelming, covering all my thoughts. Even though I left the kitchen, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, a presence that was invisible but definitely real. The cold feeling down my spine was like an invisible wind passing through every cell of my body. Every sound around me now became sharp, every noise in the house seemed as if someone was creating it on purpose, creating unexplainable tension. I glanced around the room, eyes glued to every dark corner, terrified that I would see something I couldn't explain. But there was nothing, only a heavy silence, where every step I took made the feeling of fear become more evident. I can't continue like this. Each night became longer, each sound, each movement sent me into another panic attack. I no longer have the courage to face what is happening. I couldn't ignore those images, the strange sounds, the inexplicable movements I witnessed. Reality and fear were intersecting, and I couldn't find a way to separate them. But I know one thing, I can't let it take over my life forever. The last time I stood by the kitchen door, it felt like a cliff was waiting for me to rush into. My reality, with all its nightmares and inexplicable panic, seemed to have been erased in that silent space. But every night, every creaking sound of metal pulls me back, reminding me that I never truly escaped this place. It is always waiting, quietly existing in dark corners that I cannot see, but can only feel. Maybe I'm so used to this fear that it's no longer something new. I started living with it, as if it were a part of my life. That house, with every dark corner and strange sounds, became a living, breathing creature in this space, creating a tension that never left me. This feeling was no longer a simple fear but a part of my being, pushing me along a never-ending cycle. Every night, I stand by the kitchen door, my heart pounding. Part of me hopes to see a pot sliding gently across the floor, but there are times when I fear that I will become part of that darkness myself. Invisible sounds continue to hiss in the quiet space, as if they were smiling at my fear. And I know, I may never truly escape it. It will always be there, a part of this house, a part of me. Even though I tried to grasp reason in a logical reality, part of me couldn't shake that strange feeling. That night still haunts me, like a wound that hasn't completely healed in my mind. Even though the daylight seemed to bring temporary peace, I couldn't help but feel like there was something hidden, waiting, that I couldn't identify or explain. The following nights, I found myself standing on the back porch, looking up at the dark, cloudy sky, trying to find a logical reason for that blue glow. But every time I looked outside, all I saw was quiet darkness, no sign of anything unusual, no flash of light, no trace of what I had felt. Again, I told myself it was just a hallucination, possibly caused by lack of sleep or a temporary atmospheric phenomenon. However, every time I look in the mirror or at any reflective object, I feel that invisible presence, like a ghost lingering in every corner of the house. Every time I pass a window or look across a metal surface, the feeling makes me shiver, as if I'm never truly alone. No matter how much I tried, there was still a part of me that couldn't explain what happened. I still wonder if I was truly haunted by something invisible, or if it was my mind that betrayed me, playing with feelings and thoughts I couldn't control. Every night, I returned to that house, facing the terrifying silence and darkness that covered everything. And I know, no matter how much I explain, I won't be able to escape the feeling that some part of me, or of the house, has been changed forever. That circle was not just a mark, but a dark reminder, an incomprehensible presence hovering around me. Every time I passed by it, it felt like something was pulling me into it, forcing me to face something I couldn't understand. The circle, which could not be explained by scientific theory or conventional logic, increasingly confused and frightened me. Every time I look at it, I feel like a part of me is caught in its own shadow, and can't escape. I try not to think about it, but that circle is always present in my mind. The nights I woke up, I could feel that blue light shining into the darkness again, and its image reappeared in my mind like a haunting that couldn't be shaken off. The strange feeling of an invisible force watching me, clinging to me, became too strong for me to resist. Not just a physical matter anymore, but a presence deep within my soul, as if that circle did not just belong to the physical world, but was a door opening to another world that I could not understand. And gradually, I realized that, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't run away from it. It wasn't just a mark in my backyard, but a mark in my mind, something deep inside me that I couldn't banish. I cannot simply cover it with dirt, or throw grass over it to hide the truth it represents. That feeling still lingers, and I know that I won't be able to find peace until I face it, whether I want to or not. When I looked at my reflection, I realized that I had changed. More than just a tired appearance, there was something in my eyes, an unspeakable loss, as if I had entered a land from which I could not escape. The fear, the obsession, had gone deep inside me, quietly infiltrating every part of my mind and body. I felt like a part of my soul had been left there, where that circle, that presence, had left its mark. Nightmares are not just temporary scares anymore. They have merged into my waking life, as if they never left me. Every step in the house, every door that opens makes me wait for something I can't explain. The air is heavy, sometimes leaving me with a suffocating feeling as if I can't move, can't escape this feeling. This feeling, that shadow, the heavy silence in the space around me, makes it impossible for me to continue living peacefully. Every little sound, every dark figure in the corner of the house, every time I looked toward the kitchen or out the window made me shiver. I can't escape the feeling that there is an invisible presence waiting for me, some force is watching and just waiting for me to dare to face it. No matter how hard I tried, I probably couldn't shake it. I couldn't stop thinking about the scorched circle, that strange shape in the dream, that blue light. And no matter how I try to explain it or avoid it, that feeling still sticks with me, like a wound that never heals, still deep in my thoughts and in the shadows of this house. I don't know if it's possible to live with it, but the only thing I'm sure of is that its presence won't leave me easily, no matter how much I try to stay away. That feeling, a strange combination of fear and triumph, remained with me through it all. As I knelt down, panting, exhausted and dizzy, I knew I couldn't go back to myself. Even when that presence withdrew, it left an indelible mark. What I had just experienced was not just a feeling of overcoming fear but a profound change in my mind. I faced something unexplainable, something out of this world, and I survived. But what existed outside that circle? Maybe something never really left me, always existed silently, watching from the shadows, just waiting for a moment of weakness to return. When I stood up, my heart was still heavy, even though there was no more blue light. My yard, although now just a dark garden, still feels strangely covered by something invisible. I've mastered my fear, but in my waking moments I still can't stop thinking about what was there and whether it will come back again. With every step I took outside, I felt a tension as if the air was thicker than usual, as if I was moving in a space that was not mine. These shadows, with their memories of the blue light and the scorched circle, kept coming back to me. It's not that I'm afraid of facing them, it's that I can't forget them. And in the darkness, in that suffocating silence, I realized that that presence was not just something out there, but could be right inside me, always waiting to appear when I was at my weakest. Maybe I'll never truly escape it. That feeling, like a ghost still lingering outside, never really left me. The house remained intact, my life continued, but something had profoundly changed within me. Once, as I stood in that familiar room, I realized that an invisible curtain had fallen between me and the world around me. Not a physical wound, but an invisible wound, deeply imprinted on my mind and soul. Every night I continued to wake up with an uneasy feeling, the so-called normality had become a distant thing. I could feel every little movement in the air, every slight vibration in the dark corner of the house, as if I had become a part of that ambiguity. Sometimes I wonder if I'm living in reality or have entered another world where everything can change in just a moment. Sometimes, I imagine myself standing on that grass, where the scorched circle had appeared, and hearing a whisper, an invitation from the darkness. But as soon as I thought about it, I pushed it out of my mind, telling myself that it was just a nightmare, a figment of the imagination. However, the truth is still there, waiting for me, like a silent shadow, never leaving. I continued to live in that uncertainty, knowing that each night could bring something new, an inexplicable event, like the strange blue light that appeared and disappeared. I don't know if I have the strength to face it again, but I understand that this fear will never completely go away. It has taken root in me, silently existing as a part of this house, mine.